Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awaken the power of the water god and get married with Tier Harribel? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Azure Awakening. The rain was not merely falling, it was a siege. Each drop, cold and heavy as a lead shot, hammered against the unfinished concrete of the great Naruto Bridge. The sky over the land of waves was a bruised purple-gray canvas, torn open by jagged fissures of lightning that offered fleeting, monochrome glimpses of the chaos below. The air, thick with the metallic tang of unsheathed steel, salt, and blood, was a physical weight in the lungs. This was not the cleansing rain of a passing storm. It was a suffocating, sorrowful deluge, as if the world itself was weeping for the slaughter unfolding on the skeletal spine of the bridge. Kakashi Hataki's single Sharingan eye, a crimson star in the deepening gloom, spun wildly as it tracked a dozen different vectors of death at once. His gray hair, plastered to his forehead and the back of his neck, dripped a constant stream of rainwater that mingled with the sweat beading on his skin. His green flak jacket was stained dark, not just with water, but with grime and the blood of men he had already sent to their graves. It was not enough. For every mercenary he cut down with a precise, economical flash of his kunai, two more seemed to materialize from the mist-shrouded ends of the bridge, their eyes wide with greed or the feral thrill of violence. This was a miscalculation of catastrophic proportions. Gato was not just a shipping magnate with a gang of thugs. He was a cancer that had metastasized, drawing in the worst dregs of the shinobi world like flies to a corpse. Among the screaming, sword-wielding rabble were at least 4 rogue shinobi of significant skill. He had identified their allegiances by the tattered remnants of their flak jackets and the cruel efficiency of their techniques. A former Kiri hunter nin with a barbed, chakra-infused chain. A stoic Iwa Chunin whose earth-style jutsu turned the very bridge beneath their feet into a death trap of sudden spikes and grasping hands. A Suna poison specialist, his face obscured by a grimy cloth mask, whose senbon needles glittered with a sickly green iridescence. And their leader, a man named Ryuji, a Konoha exile Kakashi vaguely remembered from his Anbu days. A man who had been drummed out for his sadistic application of wind-release jutsu. Ryuji fought with a manic glee, his laughter a shrill counterpoint to the storm's roar as his vacuum blades carved whistling arcs through the air, forcing Kakashi onto the defensive time and again. Come now, Kakashi-senpai. Ryuji shrieked, his face a rictus of crazed delight. As the famous copy ninja losing his touch. Or is it the burden of protecting these children? Kakashi's jaw was a tight line of granite beneath his mask. He deflected a volley of poisoned needles with a sharp flick of his wrist, the tiny projectiles clattering harmlessly against the concrete railing. He couldn't afford to be tagged, not even once. But his attention was split, his focus fractured. A part of him was always tracking his students. His team. Sakura, her pink hair a shockingly vibrant splash of color in the desaturated world, stood guard over Tazuna and an unconscious Sasuke. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her kunai, her body a trembling but defiant shield. Tears streamed down her face, indistinguishable from the rain, as she stared at Sasuke's still form. The Uchiha prodigy had been the first to fall. Caught in a subtle but potent auditory genjutsu from a 5th, hidden shinobi Kakashi had only managed to eliminate moments ago. Sasuke had overtaxed his newly awakened Sharingan trying to break it, and the resulting chakra backlash had sent him into a catatonic seizure. He was alive, but utterly vulnerable. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist, was slumped against a concrete pillar, his massive Kubikiribocho lying just out of reach. Both of his arms hung uselessly at his sides, courtesy of Kakashi's earlier attack. He was a caged tiger, his eyes burning with a helpless, incandescent rage as he watched the battle unfold. Beside him, Haku fought with the fluid, lethal grace of a blizzard-given human form. Crystalline ice mirrors shimmered into existence, intercepting attacks meant for Zabuza. While a storm of senbon needles, each carrying a pinprick of frozen death, kept a small perimeter of mercenaries at bay. But Haku was tiring. The sheer number of opponents was a relentless tide. And for every wave Haku repelled, another crashed against their dwindling shores. And Naruto. Kakashi's heart clenched. The boy was a maelstrom of furious orange, a whirlwind of shadow. Clones throwing the mercenaries' ranks into disarray. He was fighting with a ferocity Kakashi had never seen, fueled by a righteous anger that burned like a miniature sun in the gloom. The raw, untamed chakra of the nine tails was leaking out, visible as a faint red aura that steamed where the cold rain struck it. He was a force of nature, but an undisciplined one. He was wasting energy, fighting with rage instead of strategy. And Ryuji and his cohorts were watching, waiting for the inevitable opening. Earth-style. Stone prison. The Iwa Nin roared. Thick walls of rock erupted around a dozen of Naruto's clones, crushing them into puffs of smoke. Simultaneously, the Kiri Nin's chain lashed out like a striking serpent, wrapping around another clone and dissolving it with a sizzle of corrosive chakra. He's just a brat with a big gas tank. The poison user hissed, flicking his wrist. A fan of green-tipped needles shot towards the real Naruto. Naruto. Left. Kakashi yelled, his voice raw. He threw a shuriken, deflecting the closest needles, but three still found their mark, embedding themselves in Naruto's shoulder. Naruto cried out, stumbling. The red aura around him flared, and he ripped the Senbon out with a snarl. The wounds smoking as the Kyuubi's chakra cauterized them. But Kakashi saw the telltale shudder, the slight slowing of his movements. The poison was fast-acting, designed to cripple, not kill immediately. It seems the little demon is running on fumes, Ryuji crooned, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He made a single, elegant hand seal. Wind style. Severing gale. A transparent, razor-thin blade of wind shot from his hand, not at Naruto, but at Zabuza. It moved faster than sound, its passage marked only by a high-pitched whistle. Zabuza's eyes widened. He couldn't move. He was utterly defenseless. Time seemed to slow. Kakashi saw it. He knew he couldn't intercept it. His legs burned with exhaustion, his chakra reserves scraping bottom. But Haku saw it too. There was no hesitation. No dramatic cry. There was only movement, swift and absolute as a falling snowflake. One moment, Haku was 20 feet away. The next, a wall of ice mirrors shatter. As Haku appeared directly in the path of the wind blade. It struck with a sickening, wet thud. For a moment, Haku just stood there, a line of crimson blooming horizontally across a pristine white tunic. The mask, the porcelain face of a Kiri hunter nin, cracked down the middle. It fell away in two pieces, clattering to the wet ground, revealing a face of impossible, androgynous beauty, now marred by a faint, confused frown. Haku looked down at the gushing wound, then up at Zabuza. A single, perfect tear welled in one dark eye. Zabuza-san. The words were a liquid whisper. Haku's knees buckled, and the body fell. Not like a shinobi, but like a broken doll, landing in a heap at Zabuza's feet. Silence. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. The mercenaries, the rogue shinobi, even Ryuji, paused. Zabuza stared down at the still form, at the blood pooling around his feet, mingling with the rain to form a ghastly pinkish stream. His face, usually a mask of demonic impassivity, began to twitch. His shoulders shook. A sound tore itself from his throat, a raw, guttural noise that was not a word, but the pure, undiluted sound of a soul being ripped in two. It was a scream of such profound agony that it cut through the roar of the storm and clawed at the ears of everyone present. He lunged for his sword, his useless arms flopping, and collapsed beside Haku's body, his silent, violent sobs shaking his entire frame. It was this sound, this image of the broken demon, that finally shattered something inside Naruto Uzumaki. The raw power that exploded from him was unlike anything Kakashi had ever felt. It was not just the familiar, malevolent chakra of the nine tails. This was something deeper, something ancient and primordial. The red aura around Naruto solidified, swirling into a dense, bubbling cloak of energy with a single, spectral tail lashing behind him. His eyes, once a familiar cerulean blue, were now vertical slits of blood red. His whisker marks deepened, becoming jagged, feral scars. "I will kill you," Naruto snarled, his voice a distorted, demonic echo of its former self. He vanished. He didn't use a substitution or a flicker technique. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another, directly in front of Ryuji. He moved with a speed that Kakashi's Sharingan could barely track. He swung a clawed hand, and Ryuji, his smug grin wiped from his face and replaced with sheer terror. Barely managed to bring his arms up to block. The impact didn't create a boom, it created a vacuum. The air itself seemed to fold inward as Ryuji was launched backward, tumbling end over end for 50 feet before crashing into a concrete support beam with a sickening crunch of bone and steel. The other rogues stared, momentarily frozen by the display of savage power. That was the opening Naruto's clones, now reformed and moving with the same demonic speed, needed. The battle devolved from a tense standoff into a brutal, one-sided massacre. Clones tore through the mercenaries, their claws ripping through flesh and bone with contemptuous ease. The Iwa Nin was overwhelmed by a dozen clones that dragged him down, their combined Rasengans grinding him into the very earth he commanded. The poison user found himself trapped in a vortex of orange blurs, his needles useless, before a clawed hand ripped his throat out. Kakashi watched, a cold dread seeping into his bones. This was not Naruto. This was a force of pure destruction, a calamity wearing his student's face. This was the reason Jinchuriki were feared, the reason they were treated as weapons, as monsters. Only Ryuji, the wind user, and the Kiri chain wielder remained. Ryuji, clutching a broken arm, staggered to his feet, his face pale with a mixture of fear and fury. Monster. You're just a damn monster. He made a complex series of hand signs, his one good hand a blur. Wind style. Dragon's breath gale. A massive, swirling torrent of wind and razor-sharp vacuum blades erupted from his mouth, roaring towards Naruto. It was a jutsu powerful enough to level a small forest. Naruto met it head-on. He opened his mouth and a wave of pure, demonic chakra, a miniature-tailed beast bomb, met the gale. The two forces collided in a spectacular explosion that shook the entire bridge to its foundations, sending a plume of steam and debris high into the air. Through the smoke, the Kiri Nin saw his chance. While the monster was distracted, he would end this. He whipped his barbed chain, aiming for the back of Naruto's neck. But Naruto wasn't distracted. The head of the beast snapped to the side, its slitted red eyes locking onto the Kiri Nin. He didn't even bother to dodge. He simply reached up and caught the chain mid-flight. The corrosive chakra sizzled against his bubbling cloak, doing no harm. With a single, contemptuous tug, he yanked the Kiri Nin off his feet, sending him flying through the air. Naruto caught him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The man struggled, his legs kicking uselessly, his face turning purple. You hurt, my friends, the demon Naruto rasped. Its clawed hand tightened. There was a wet, cracking sound, and the man went limp. Naruto dropped the body and turned his gaze back to the last one standing. Ryuji was trembling, his bravado utterly gone. He took a stumbling step back, then another. He turned to run. You're not getting away. The voice was no longer a demonic rasp. It was Naruto's voice, cold and flat. The red chakra cloak receded slightly. Naruto took a step, and then another, his movements stiff, almost pained. He was fighting for control. Ryuji, seeing a flicker of the boy he thought he was fighting, took his chance. He spun around, his good hand flying through a final set of seals. This was his ultimate technique. A forbidden jutsu that traded chakra for lethality. Die. Wind release. Vacuum blade annihilation. It was not a gale or a projectile. It was a subtle, almost invisible distortion in the air around Naruto. A sphere of razor-sharp wind, contracting on itself. It was an inescapable attack, designed to shred its target from every direction at once. Naruto stopped. He looked down, as if saying the invisible blades for the first time. The red chakra flared, trying to protect him, but the wind blades were too fine, too sharp. They sliced through the demonic cloak, then through his orange jacket, then through his flesh. Dozens of deep, clean cuts appeared all over his body simultaneously. Blood erupted from him in a fine crimson mist. He looked up, his red eyes wide with something that looked almost like surprise. He took one more step, a hand outstretched towards a terrified Ryuji, before a final, larger blade of wind materialized directly in front of him and drove itself clean through his chest. It was a perfect, fatal blow. The blade pierced his heart, exiting through his back in a spray of blood and gore. The red chakra cloak vanished completely. The slitted eyes faded back to cerulean blue, wide and unfocused. The whisker marks softened. He was just a boy again. A boy with a hole where his heart should be. I did it. Ryuji stammered, his eyes wild with disbelief. I killed the demon. Naruto swayed on his feet. The light in his eyes began to fade. He looked past Ryuji, his gaze unfocused, seeing the horrified faces of Sakura and Kakashi. He saw Zabuza, cradling Haku's body. A single, bloody tear traced a path down his cheek. His lips moved, but no sound came out. And then, he fell. Face down, onto the cold, wet concrete of the bridge, his body landing with a soft, final thud. His chakra signature, which had been a raging bonfire just moments before, winked out of existence. Silence returned, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain and Sakura's soul-shattering scream. There was nothing. Then, there was everything. My first sensation was not of life, but of connection. The black, silent void of death did not recede, it was filled. It was filled with the feeling of a million billion tiny impacts against a surface that was no longer my skin. I was the rain. Each drop that struck the bridge, the ocean, the trembling leaves of the distant forest, was a part of me. My second sensation was of flow. The blood that had poured from my chest was not lost. I could feel it, a warm, iron-rich current seeping into the cracks of the concrete, joining the greater flow of the rainwater as it trickled over the edge and fell, down, 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 to merge with the vast, churning consciousness of the ocean. The ocean, it was immense. A being of incomprehensible depth and patience. Its surface tormented by the storm, its depths a realm of silent, crushing peace. I was that too. I felt the tear on Sakura's cheek. It was salt and sorrow, a tiny, personal ocean. I felt the sweat on Kakashi-sensei's brow, a saline testament to his exhaustion and his fear. I felt the water in the very cells of Tezuna's body, the quiet, steady rhythm of a life winding down. I felt the cold, still liquid in Haku's veins, a river that had ceased its journey. There was no sound, yet I heard a symphony. The percussive beat of the storm, the deep bass hum of the sea, the delicate whispered melody of the mist. There was no sight, yet I saw in shades of pressure, temperature, and flow. The world was a tapestry woven from a single, ubiquitous thread. Water. It was. In the air I no longer needed to breathe. It was in the earth beneath the bridge. It was in the bodies of my friends and my enemies. The man who killed me, Ryuji, was a vessel of it, his blood pumping with fear. His heart a frantic drum against a cage of bone and sinew. The anger was gone. The hatred, the demonic rage of the fox, it was a speck of dust in this new, infinite ocean of being. Kurama was there, a raging inferno of chakra deep within me, but his prison was now a shoreless sea. He was raging against an entire world that was now, somehow, me. A new feeling arose from the depths of this awareness. It was not an emotion. It was a purpose, an imperative, a quiet, absolute understanding. The imbalance must be corrected. The discordant note must be silenced. The corruption must be cleansed. My body, the small, broken vessel of flesh and bone lying on the bridge, began to move. I did not command it. The ocean commanded it. The rain commanded it. Life itself commanded it. Ryuji's triumphant laughter died in his throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. Everyone on the bridge froze, their eyes locked on the impossible sight before them. Naruto Uzumaki's body was getting up. There was no sound, no dramatic surge of energy. He rose to his feet with a slow, fluid motion, as if being lifted by invisible strings. The gaping, bloody hole in his chest swirled, the edges pulling together. It was not the violent, steaming regeneration of the Kyuubi. This was something else entirely. Water from the rain-slicked concrete flowed upwards, defying gravity. It poured into the wound, glowing with a soft, cerulean light. Knitting flesh, muscle, and bone together with impossible speed and precision. In seconds, the wound was gone, leaving behind only pale, unblemished skin. He stood straight, his head bowed. The rain, which had been hammering down relentlessly, began to soften. The wind died down. An unnatural, profound silence fell over the bridge, so deep that the only sound was the collective, ragged breathing of the survivors. Naruto lifted his head. His eyes were no longer blue. They were a solid, luminous azure, like the heart of a glacier lit from within. They held no pupil, no iris. Only a boundless depth of pure, soft light. There was no anger in them. No sadness. There was only a calm, ancient, and terrifyingly vast consciousness. What? What are you? Ryuji whispered, his voice trembling. He took a step back, his bravado completely shattered, replaced by a primal fear he had never known. Naruto did not answer. He did not seem to even register the question. He simply raised his right hand, palm upward, towards the sky, and the world obeyed. The rain stopped falling. Every single drop, from the highest clouds to the inches above the ground, froze in place, Jing in the air like a billion suspended diamonds. The mist that had shrouded the bridge began to move, not drifting on the wind, but flowing with purpose, coalescing from all directions towards the center of the bridge. The very ocean beneath them ceased its churning, its surface becoming a perfect, placid mirror. Gato, watching from his boat with a mixture of confusion and terror, saw the water around his vessel begin to move. It flowed away from the hull, not as if the boat were rising, but as if the sea itself were withdrawing. On the bridge, the mercenaries who had survived the Kyuubi's initial onslaught huddled together. Their weapons held uselessly. They watched, mesmerized with horror, as the collected mist and the suspended raindrops began to flow towards them. It wasn't a wave or a torrent. It was a silent, inexorable river in the air, weaving its way around Naruto's allies, parting around Sakura, Kakashi, and Tazuna, flowing past a stunned Zabuza. The water converged on the 100 or so mercenaries and the terrified Ryuji. It did not splash against them. It enveloped them. A perfect, silent sphere of water formed, 30 feet in diameter, enclosing them all. Inside, their panicked, muffled screams were visible, their faces contorted in terror as they pounded against the inescapable, liquid wall. Then, Naruto slowly closed his hand into a fist. The sphere of water began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, it became a whirlpool, a perfect vortex suspended in midair. The water within it became impossibly dense, its surface shimmering like polished obsidian. There were no screams, no sounds of crushing bone or tearing flesh. There was no blood. The forms of the men inside simply dissolved. They were unmade, their bodies broken down by the colossa. L pressure and the divine chakra infusing the water, reduced to their constituent elements and absorbed into the vortex. One moment, they were there, 100 terrified men trapped in a liquid prison. The next, there was nothing. Only the silently spinning, perfectly clean sphere of water. Naruto opened his hand. The sphere ceased its rotation. The water, now pure and clear, dispersed. It did not fall. It evaporated into a fine, clean mist that rose into the air, vanishing into the clearing sky above. Nothing was left. No bodies. No bloodstains. No weapons. Only the clean, rain-washed concrete of the bridge. It was as if Gato's army had never been there at all. On his boat, Gato stared, his mouth agape, his cigar falling into the water. The sea, now calm, began to flow back towards his boat, but not to lift it. 4 columns of water, solid as marble, rose from the ocean. They gripped the hull of the boat, lifting it clear out of the sea. The boat was raised higher and higher, until it was level with the bridge. Gato and his 2 bodyguards scrambled to the edge, looking down at the boy with the glowing blue eyes. Naruto just looked at them. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just looked. And the water columns squeezed. The thick wood of the boat groaned, then splintered, then shattered with a deafening crack. The boat and the 3 men within it were crushed into a ball of wreckage, which was then dragged beneath the surface of the now peaceful ocean. A few bubbles rose, and then, silence. The imbalance had been corrected. On the bridge, the azure light in Naruto's eyes flickered, then faded. His pupils returned. The oceanic blue remained, but the terrifying glow was gone. And with the return of his mortal sight, the sensory overload hit him like a physical blow. The consciousness of the storm above. The weight of the entire ocean below. The feeling of the water in every blade of grass on the shore. The rhythm of the blood in his friend's veins. A billion points of sensation. A flood of information too vast for any human mind to process. He gasped, his eyes wide with pain and terror. He clutched his head, a raw scream tearing from his throat as the world, in its entirety, tried to pour itself into his mind. He staggered backward, tripping over his own feet. He collapsed onto his back, his body convulsing. His new azure eyes, wide with the agony of a god trapped in a mortal shell, stared blankly up at the sky. Through a sudden break in the bruised clouds, the first, clean ray of the morning sun shone down, illuminating the boy who had just become something more. And perhaps something less than human. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the desert, whispers in the rain. The first thing Naruto became aware of was the flow. It was a sensation that existed beneath hearing. Beyond touch. It was the slow, rhythmic drip of saline solution from an IV bag, a tiny, suspended river hanging by his bedside. He could feel the precise moment each drop separated from the rest. The subtle shift in pressure as it fell through the plastic tube, and the cool, spreading bloom of it as it entered the river of his own blood. He could feel its journey through his veins. A foreign current mingling with the native tide of his life, a microscopic report on his body's own hydrology. He opened his eyes. The sterile white ceiling of Konoha General Hospital greeted him. A familiar sight from a lifetime of injuries. Yet, it looked different. He could see the faint traces of moisture in the air, the way the light from the window caught on particles of dust and water vapor, creating a shimmering, almost invisible web that filled the room. His gaze drifted to the window itself. Condensation traced delicate, branching patterns on the cool glass, a miniature, frozen delta. He felt, more than saw, the subtle temperature difference that birthed it, the warm, humid air of the room kissing the chilled pane of glass that stood sentinel against the world outside. A vase of wilting daisies sat on his nightstand. He could feel the water being drawn up their fibrous stems, a desperate, final pilgrimage to dying petals. He could sense the exact moment a cell wall would rupture, releasing its precious, life-sustaining cargo in a microscopic cascade of failure. The feeling was a quiet, constant hum of a million tiny processes, a background noise that had never been there before. It was exhausting. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Tsunade entered, her face a carefully constructed mask of clinical neutrality that did little to hide the deep concern in her amber eyes. Behind her followed Jiraiya, his usual boisterous energy subdued, his expression grim. Kakashi brought up the rear, his single visible eye conveying a complex mixture of relief, worry, and a profound, unnerving awe. "You're awake," Tsunade stated, her voice softer than he expected. She moved to his bedside, her hands glowing with green diagnostic chakra as she hovered them over his chest. "How do you feel?" Naruto considered the question. The truth was a chaotic symphony of sensation he couldn't possibly put into words. "I feel the water table shifting 300 feet beneath the village." Or, "I can feel the exact moment your sweat is about to bead on your temple," didn't seem like appropriate answers. "Quiet," he finally said, his voice raspy from disuse. The word hung in the air, unexpected. It was not a word anyone in the room associated with Naruto Uzumaki. Tsunade's brow furrowed. "Your chakra pathways are stable. Unusually so. They're completely rebuilt. There's no trace of the injury. Not even a scar." She pulled her hands back, her frown deepening. "Your eyes." Naruto met her gaze. He knew they were different. He had seen his reflection in the water of the IV bag. The boisterous sky blue of his youth was gone, replaced by a deep, placid azure, the color of the ocean at its calmest and most profound depths. They were eyes that held an unnerving stillness. "What happened, Naruto?" Jiraiya asked, stepping forward. Kakashi's report was difficult to believe. Naruto's gaze shifted to his sensei. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel the burning rage that had consumed him on the bridge. That emotion felt distant now, like a half-remembered storm from a previous life. What he felt was a vast, hollow ache. "Haku, is he?" Kakashi's visible eye closed for a moment. "We brought his body back, along with Zabuza's. Zabuza didn't make it. He bled out on the bridge, next to Haku. His last request was to be buried beside him." Naruto absorbed the information without an outward reaction. But inside, he felt it. He felt the absence. Two more vessels, two more intricate systems of water and life, now still and silent. The quiet hum of their existence had been extinguished. He lowered his gaze to the thin white blanket covering his lap. "I see." The three adults exchanged worried glances. This was not the Naruto they knew. The boy who screamed and cried and raged at the injustice of the world was gone, replaced by this calm, watchful young man. Tsunade sighed, forcing a brisk tone. Well, you need to replenish your fluids. You've been out for 3 days. She poured a cup of steaming tea from a thermos. Here, drink. She handed it to him. The cup was hot, the ceramic radiating a searing heat. As Naruto took it, his gaze fell upon the swirling green liquid. He felt its temperature, the frantic, energetic dance of its molecules. It was too hot to drink. Without thinking, simply with the intent of cooling it, he watched as a delicate wisp of steam rose from the surface. Thicker than it should have been. The searing heat in his hands subsided to a pleasant warmth. He took a sip. It was the perfect temperature. He didn't notice what he had done, but the other three did. Jiraiya's eyes widened. Kakashi's head tilted, his Sharingan, though covered, surely analyzing the impossible event. Tsunade's hand, which had been reaching for a scroll, froze in midair. Naruto, she began, her voice cautious. Did you just? Naruto looked up, confused by their expressions. Did I what? Before anyone could answer, he shifted to get more comfortable, his elbow bumping the half-empty glass of water on his nightstand. It tipped, falling toward the floor. Instinct took over. Naruto's hand shot out, not to catch it, but simply as a reaction. The falling water, halfway to the ground, stopped. It hung suspended in the air, breaking free from the tumbling glass to form a perfect, shimmering sphere. It hovered for a second, catching the light like a crystal ball. Before it fell with a soft splash onto the tiled floor. The glass landed a moment later, rolling harmlessly to a stop. Naruto stared at the puddle, then at his hand. This time, he had felt it. A pull, a command. An unconscious act of will that had bent the world to his desire. A cold dread, the first strong emotion he'd felt since waking, washed over him. The hum of the world's water. The constant sensory input he had been trying to suppress, surged to the forefront of his mind. The water in the pipes of the hospital, the vast reservoir beneath the Hokage monument, the moisture in the breath of every patient. Every doctor, every villager, it was a deafening, crushing roar of information. He squeezed his eyes shut, a low groan escaping his lips as he clutched his head. It's too loud, he whispered. His body trembling. Make it stop. Tsunade was at his side instantly, her hands on his shoulders. Naruto, focus on me. Focus on my voice. What's too loud? Everything, he gasped. The single word a testament to an agony they couldn't possibly comprehend. The water. I can feel all of it. It won't stop. He was a boy who had been given the senses of a god, a more tall mind drowning in an ocean of omniscience. And in that moment, all he felt was the terrifying, crushing loneliness of it. Hueco Mundo was a realm defined by absence. Its sky was a starless, changeless shroud of blackest night. Its moon was a skull, stark and white and eternal, casting no shadows, only a flat, merciless illumination upon the world below. Its ground was an endless expanse of white sand, fine as bone dust, stretching to a horizon that never drew closer. Its life, the skeletal quartz trees that dotted the landscape, was a mockery of nature, crystalline and dead. And its air was an absence of its own. It was cold, thin, and so utterly devoid of moisture it felt as if it were actively trying to desiccate any who breathed it. This was a world of thirst, a kingdom of parched stillness and predatory silence. In the heart of this desolation stood Las Noches, a fortress palace of impossible scale, its white walls and towering structures so vast they seemed a part of the geology itself. And within the highest chamber of the Tres Cifras, on a throne carved from bone-white crystal, sat Tier Harribel. Her olive skin was a warm, living contrast to the sterile white of her throne room. Her blonde hair was a splash of muted gold in a world of monochrome. Her eyes, the color of jade, were closed in meditation. She was a picture of serene, coiled power, her presence a silent testament to the strength that had earned her the rank of Tercera Espada. She sat, she breathed, she felt the flow of Reishi, the spiritual particles that comprised all things, in her domain. The flow was predictable, unchanging. It was the slow, entropic decay of a dying world. Until it wasn't. It began as a tremor on the very edge of her perception. A subtle, discordant vibration in the fabric of reality. The reishi in the air, usually listless, stirred as if touched by a phantom wind. Harribel's eyes remained closed, but her focus sharpened. This was not the aggressive, jagged signature of a hollow. It was not the rigid, ordered pressure of a Shinigami. It was something other. Something utterly alien. Then, the sensation grew. It was not a Ryutsu that pressed down, demanding submission. It did not burn with rage or hunger. It was a pressure that bloomed. It felt, impossibly, like life. And it carried with it a signature that was so foreign to this world as to be a complete paradox. It felt like water. Not the memory of water. Not the spiritual manifestation of it she commanded with her Zanpakuto. This was the pure, elemental concept of water, a font of it so vast and so dense it was like feeling a phantom ocean overlaid upon her desert kingdom. It was an oasis in the heart of a mirage, a cool, soothing presence that defied every law of Hueco Mundo. Her eyes snapped open. Lady Harribel. 3 figures knelt before her throne. Her Fracken. Her family. Cyan Sung Sun. Her face half hidden behind her sleeve, her serpentine eyes narrowed with concern. Emilo Apache. Her fists clenched. Her single horn seeming to bristle with agitation. Francesca Mila Rose. Her Amazon-like build tense, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. What is it? What do you sense? Mila Rose asked, her voice a low growl. Nothing. Apache snapped, glaring at Mila Rose. I don't feel a thing. Why are you always so tense? Because unlike you, Knuckle Dragger, I possess a sense of awareness. Beyond what's directly in front of my face, Mila Rose retorted. What was that, you overgrown lioness? Both of you, be silent, Sung Sun hissed, her voice a silken, venomous thread. Lady Harribel is disturbed. Your braying is not helping. Harribel raised a hand, and the argument ceased instantly. Their loyalty to her was the single, unshakable pillar of their existence. It is not something you would recognize, Harribel said. Her voice calm and even, yet carrying an undercurrent of profound curiosity. It is an anomaly. A spiritual pressure that feels of a world that is not this one. An intruder? Apache asked, her knuckles cracking as she tightened her fists. We'll tear them apart. No, Harribel said, rising from her throne. She walked to the edge of the vast, unadorned balcony. Looking out over the endless white desert. It does not feel like an invasion. It is not hostile. It is distant. A beacon. A wellspring. She focused, extending her senses, trying to pinpoint the source. It was like trying to grasp smoke, yet the impression it left was undeniable. It was a signature of immense, boundless power, yet it was calm, stable, almost peaceful. It was the antithesis of everything this world stood for. Aizen had preached evolution through conflict, power through sacrifice. The hollows preyed on each other in a desperate, lonely struggle for existence. This felt different. It felt like creation. Since Lord Aizen's defeat, a vacuum has formed, Harribel mused, more to herself than to her Fracken. Baragon is gone. Stark is gone. The old order has crumbled. Now, the strong devour the weak in the shadows, clinging to their meaningless territories. It is the same cycle of sacrifice, the same lonely hunt, just without a king to command it. She turned back to her followers. Her jade eyes sweeping over them. This anomaly. This oasis. It could be a threat beyond our comprehension. It could be a trap laid by the Shinigami. Or it could be something new entirely. A power that does not conform to the laws we have always known. Her gaze was resolute, her decision made. Ignorance is a luxury we cannot afford. The law of this world is to devour or be devoured. But knowledge is a weapon that can change the very nature of the hunt. She raised her hand, and the air before her began to shimmer and tear. I will find the source of this feeling. You 3 will guard Las Noches in my absence. Do not engage any who challenge you. Consolidate our territory. Protect our own. That is my only order. Lady Harribel, you cannot go alone. Mila Rose protested. It is too dangerous. Quote. What if it's a trap? Apache added, for once in agreement. Harribel stepped towards the shimmering tear in space, the Garganta. The 3 of you fighting together are stronger than I am alone. Your duty is here. Mine is to understand this. Her final look was one of regal, unshakable resolve. Sacrifice has long been the way of Hueco Mundo. It is time we discover if there can be another path. Quote. With that, she stepped into the churning darkness of the Garganta, her senses fixed on the impossible call of a distant, phantom ocean. The rain in Omegakure was a living thing. It was the city's breath, its blood, its soul. For years, it had been an extension of one man's will, one man's sorrow. Conan, the angel of this steel and water cage, knew its every mood. She knew the heavy, oppressive drumming of Nagato's rage, the fine, weeping mist of his grief, and the cold, steady drizzle of his resolve. The rain was their sensory network, their shield, their identity. Each drop was infused with the chakra of a god who had lost his faith in humanity. She sat in her sanctuary at the apex of the tallest tower, a room crafted entirely from paper. Paper chairs, paper tables, a massive, intricate paper flower that served as a throne. She was surrounded by the rustling whispers of her own creation. From her vantage point, she looked out through a vast window at the city below, a dark, vertical landscape weeping under a permanent gray sky. Today, the rain felt wrong. The change was subtle, something no one else in the village would ever notice. It was a shift in the very texture of the chakra infused within it. For years, the rain had felt sad. It carried the weight of Nagato's burdens, the lingering pain of Yahiko's death. But for the past 3 days, a new note had appeared in the sorrowful symphony. It was a quiet undercurrent of warmth, of life. The rain still fell, but it felt cleaner, purer. As if a single drop of life-giving nectar had been added to a bitter potion. Not enough to change its taste, but enough to alter its essence. It was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred sorrow that defined them. And yet, it was not unwelcome. It was a mystery that felt both like a sacrilege and a strange, unbidden whisper of hope. Her eyes drifted to a single, perfect paper rose she had crafted that morning. It sat on the windowsill, its delicate edges slowly darkening as it absorbed the moisture from the air. A single drop of rain from the window pane slid down and landed squarely in the center of the bloom. Normally, the paper would have become saturated instantly, wilting and losing its form. But it didn't. Instead, the paper seemed to drink the water. The drop was absorbed, and for a fleeting moment, the heart of the paper rose glowed with a faint, azure light. It held its shape, its form seemingly reinforced by the very element that should have destroyed it. Conan's eyes widened slightly. She reached out a slender finger, gently touching a petal. It felt stronger, more resilient. This was not Nagato's power. This was not her own. This was something else. A new god whispering in her reign. Far away, in the cold, stone heart of Iwagakure. The mood was far less mystical and far more pragmatic. The office of the third Tsuchikage, Onoki, was a place of stark, unyielding functionality. Maps of the continent covered the stone walls. And scrolls were stacked in orderly, precarious piles. Onoki floated behind his desk, his ancient, wizened form belying the immense power he still wielded. His large red nose twitched with irritation as he glared at the report in his hand. Across from him stood his granddaughter, Kuretsuchi, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of impatience and sharp-witted curiosity. A chakra. Release that momentarily outstripped the full power of a tailed beast, Onoki grumbled, his voice like grinding stones. And the source. A C-rank mission to the land of waves. It makes no sense. The sensors didn't malfunction. Lord Third, the analyst, a nervous Chunin, stammered. We triple-checked. The signature was elemental, but not of any known nature. It was vast, overwhelming, and then it simply vanished. No radioactive fallout. No environmental devastation noted by our long-range scouts. The energy was either perfectly contained or perfectly dispersed. Both possibilities are terrifying. Konoha. Onoki spat the word like a curse. It has to be them. This stinks of the Yellow Flash's legacy. Some new, absurdly powerful jutsu they've been hiding. They get a new Hokage, the slug princess of all people. And suddenly they have a weapon that can erase an army without leaving a trace. I don't like it. It could be a new bloodline awakening in the Uchiha survivor, Kuretsuchi mused, her sharp chin tilted in thought. Her voice was confident, carrying the brash edge of youth tempered by keen intelligence. Or perhaps the Jinchuriki has broken another seal. He's Minato's brat, after all. He's bound to be trouble. Whatever it is, it represents a shift in the balance of power, Onoki said, his eyes narrowing. And Iwagakure does not tolerate being left in the dark. We have spent decades rebuilding since the last war. I will not have our security threatened by some new Konoha trick. So what's the plan, old man? Kuretsuchi asked, her tone bordering on disrespectful, though it was their usual dynamic. You want to start a war over a sensor reading? Don't be an idiot, girl, Onoki snapped. War is a tool for when diplomacy and espionage fail. Send a team. Discreetly. I want to know what happened on that bridge. I want to know about this new weapon. Find out if it can be broken. Or if it can be copied. His gaze grew hard. And pay special attention to the Nine-Tails boy. Power like that always has a source. Find it. Kuritsuchi smirked, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Consider it done, Gramps. It's been a while since we've had a chance to test Konoha's mettle. As she turned to leave, a new age of shinobi politics was set in motion, not by treaties or declarations, but by the echoes of a power that none of them could yet comprehend. Back in Konoha, Naruto stood on the roof of the hospital. The evening breeze cool against his skin. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and violet, casting long shadows across the village he called home. He had been released, but he hadn't gone to his apartment. The quiet solitude of the roof was the only place he could find a semblance of peace. He was learning. Slowly, he found that if he focused his vast new awareness on a single point, he could dull the overwhelming roar of the whole. He focused now on a single droplet of dew forming on the railing in front of him. He could feel its weight, its surface tension. The way it bent the last rays of sunlight. He could feel the cool night air giving birth to it. By focusing on the one, he could build a temporary wall against the everything. Below, in the Hokage Tower, he knew a different kind of storm was brewing. He didn't need his new senses to know it. He could picture the scene perfectly. The village elders, Homura and Kaharu, their faces etched with suspicion. And Danzo Shimura, his one visible eye cold and calculating, his presence a pool of chilling stillness. They would be grilling Jiraiya and Kakashi, their words dissecting him, classifying him. Turning him from a boy into a strategic asset. A weapon to be controlled. A power to be harnessed for Konoha. Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't want to be a weapon. He didn't want this power. He just wanted the crushing noise to stop. He wanted to feel like himself again. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, a long, quiet sigh of exhaustion and grief. As he breathed out, a single, imperceptible pulse of pure, calm chakra emanated from him. It was not a wave of power or an attack. It was simply an echo of his own weary soul, a ripple of his essence cast out into the world. It was a sigh made manifest. The ripple spread, silent and unseen. In the churning darkness of the Garganta, Tier Harribel, navigating the chaotic pathways between worlds, suddenly stopped. The vague, distant feeling of the oasis sharpened, clarified, becoming a single, pure note in the dimensional dissonance. It was no longer a general location. It was a precise coordinate, a clear and undeniable homing beacon. Her eyes narrowed in grim determination. She was close. In the highest tower of Omegakure, Conan watched, her breath hitched, as the paper rose on her windowsill, which had held the faint azure glow. Suddenly pulsed with a soft, gentle light, before fading back to normal. The rain outside seemed to quiet for a moment, its sorrowful patter replaced by a profound and momentary hush. A question bloomed in her heart. As delicate and as persistent as the paper flower itself. The echoes of one boy's awakening had been sent out into the world. And now, from the desert and the rain, the world was beginning to answer. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Queen of the Wastes. Training Ground 7 was a place of ghosts and echoes. A pocket of engineered wilderness nestled within Konoha's protective walls. It was a sanctuary of deep woods, a wide, placid lake, and the thrumming, incessant life of the forest. For Naruto, it had once been a place of childish rivalries, of bells and teamwork. Of a past that felt as distant as a foreign country. Now, it was a necessity. It was one of the few places within the village with enough open water to allow him to breathe. He sat in the lotus position on a flat, moss-covered rock at the very edge of the lake. The air was a thick, humid blanket, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet perfume of unseen blossoms. The drone of cicadas was a constant, high-pitched thrum, a sound that vibrated in his very bones. To a normal shinobi, this was simply background noise. To Naruto, it was a symphony of agonizing detail. He could feel the frantic, fluttering heartbeat of a dragonfly as it skimmed the lake's surface. He could sense the slow, methodical crawl of a beetle deep within the rotting heart of a fallen log. And the water was the loudest voice of all. His consciousness was spread throughout the lake. He felt the lazy, sinuous movements of the carp in the murky depths, their scales displacing the water with infinitesimal precision. He felt the sunlight warming the top layer of the water, creating a distinct thermocline 5 feet below the surface. He felt the slow, silent process of algae forming on the submerged rocks, a patient, greening conquest. It was a billion points of data, a billion tiny lives, and their collective existence was a roaring, ceaseless torrent in his mind. Meditation was his only defense. He had been taught by Jiraiya to clear his mind, to find a point of nothingness. But for him, there was no nothingness. The world was too loud. So he was trying a different approach, one he had discovered himself. He was learning to focus. He pulled his sprawling awareness back from the far shores, from the deepest trenches, from every fish and floating leaf, and tried to focus it all on a single, impossible point. The solitary water molecule at the very center of the lake. It was an exercise in immense mental fortitude. He built walls of will, damming the flood of information, forcing it down a channel that grew narrower and narrower until, there. A moment of stillness. A single, perfect point of awareness in a sea of silence. The roar subsided to a whisper. Peace. Fleeting, fragile, but real. The peace was shattered by a sound like the world tearing. It was not a loud noise, but it was fundamentally wrong. It was the sound of space being ripped apart like old cloth. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his newfound azure gaze instantly locking onto a point in the air 50 yards away, above the center of the lake. A black line appeared in the humid air, then widened, pulling apart reality to reveal a churning, chaotic darkness within. The immediate effect was atmospheric. The humid, heavy air was suddenly sucked towards the rift, a phantom wind that smelled of ozone and dry, ancient dust. The temperature in the immediate vicinity of the tear dropped 20 degrees, chilling the moisture in the air into a swirling vortex of mist. Simultaneously, across the village, a dozen different alarms began to shriek. In the Hokage Tower, the enchanted crystal of the village's barrier defense system flared a violent, angry crimson. The Anbu on duty shouted orders, their voices tight with shock. No one had breached the barrier. Something had simply appeared inside it. Tsunade slammed her fist on her desk, her face a mask of fury. Report. Massive spiritual anomaly. Training Ground 7. Lady Hokage. The signature is unknown. It's not chakra. Seal the perimeter. All available Jonin, converge on those coordinates. Kakashi. Jiraiya. With me, now. Back at the lake. The moment stretched into an eternity. Naruto rose to his feet, his body coiled not with aggression, but with an intense, watchful caution. He felt no malice from the rift, no killing intent. He felt only a powerful, focused, and deeply curious presence. It was the same signature he had felt a faint echo of in the hospital, the same one he now knew was drawn to him, the source of the anomaly in Hueco Mundo. A single, sandaled foot emerged from the garganta, stepping onto the surface of the lake. The water did not ripple. It held the weight as if it were solid ground. Then, the figure emerged fully. And the rift snapped shut behind her with a final, definitive thud that echoed in the sudden silence. She was a vision of stark, predatory grace. Her attire was a jagged ensemble of pristine white, exposing a sun-kissed olive midriff and powerful legs. Her most striking feature was the fragment of a hollow mask that covered the lower half of her face, a jawbone of bleached white that obscured her mouth and chin. A massive zanpakuto was strapped horizontally across her back, its hilt resembling a shark's fin. But it was her eyes that held Naruto's attention. They were a piercing, intelligent jade green. And they were fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense. The woman, Tier Harribel, stood on the water, her very presence a contradiction to the lush, vibrant world around her. She was an avatar of the desert, of stark lines and arid stillness, and the forest seemed to shrink away from the dry, cold spiritual pressure that radiated from her in invisible waves. Naruto felt her presence as a void in the water-rich tapestry of his senses. She was a point of absolute dryness in a world of suffocating humidity. You, she said, her voice slightly muffled by the mask, yet carrying a clear, commanding tone. It was a simple word, but it held the weight of a long journey and 100 unanswered questions. The source. The oasis. Naruto did not ready a stance or a jutsu. He simply met her gaze. You're the one I felt, he stated, his voice calm. From the other side, Harribel took a slow step towards him, still walking on the water's surface. My senses did not deceive me. This world is saturated with your energy. It clings to everything, like dew. She tilted her head, her analytical gaze sweeping over him. You are not Shinigami. Why? Our power is not the ordered cant of their Kido. Yet you are not hollow. You possess no hunger, no emptiness. Her eyes narrowed. K-Ares. What are you? Before Naruto could answer, she decided to elicit a response through other means. With a movement so fluid it was almost imperceptible, the massive blade was in her hand. She didn't point it at him. She simply held it, and the air around the blade began to shimmer with heat. The water vapor sizzling into nothingness. The pressure she emitted intensified tenfold, a physical force that pressed down on the training ground, causing the leaves on the trees to tremble. It was a test. A challenge. Naruto's response was to hold up a single, empty hand. I don't want to fight you. A statement rarely made by one who possesses such power, Harribel observed, her voice flat. Let us see if your actions match your words. She raised her free hand, fingers splayed. A ball of dense, golden energy, crackling with raw power, began to form in her palm. The sound it made was a high-pitched, rising hum, a promise of utter annihilation. Asero. Naruto felt the spiritual particles being violently compressed, a discordant shriek in the natural harmony of the world. He knew a wall of water wouldn't be enough. He had to show her that their understanding of power operated on entirely different planes. As she thrust her hand forward, unleashing the golden beam of destruction, Naruto lowered his own hand and touched the surface of the lake. He did not create a wall. He commanded the lake. With a deep, resonant groan, the body of water split in two. A vast canyon opened up in the lake. The water pulling back to form two towering, vertical walls that held their shape as if they were solid glass. The muddy lakebed, with its rocks and startled, flapping fish, was exposed to the air for the first time in a century. The Sero, its trajectory fixed, shot harmlessly into the newly formed chasm. It traveled the length of the lakebed and exploded against the far earthen bank in a dazzling detonation of sand and energy. Then, just as quickly as they had parted, the two walls of water crashed back together. The sound was not a splash, but a colossal, deafening whump. Like the clap of a giant's hands. A massive plume of steam and displaced air erupted from the center of the lake, rising 100 feet into the sky. When it settled, the lake was as it was. Placid, whole. The Sero, and the immense energy it carried, had been simply swallowed. Harribel's eyes widened almost imperceptibly above her mask. That was not a technique. That was an act of absolute dominion. She had aimed a cannon at him, and he had responded by moving the world out of its way. Her respect grew, and with it, her need to understand the limits of this boy's power. Impressive, she stated, her tone holding a new note of genuine curiosity. She raised her blade, Tiburon. But dealing with a single projectile is a simple matter. Let us see how you handle a relentless tide. She pointed the blade at him. Herviendo, she commanded. The water at her feet began to hiss and boil. A wave of superheated, scalding water erupted from the lake's surface, a 10-foot wall of rolling, boiling death that roared towards Naruto. The sound was like 1,000 screaming kettles, and the sheer heat of its passage caused the leaves on the nearby trees to curl and blacken. Naruto stood his ground on the shore. He felt the kinetic energy of the approaching wave, the violent, chaotic agitation of its H2O molecules. To counter it with an opposing force, another wave, would be a brutish, inefficient response. It would be an admission that he was playing her game. So, he chose not to play at all. He raised a single hand, palm facing the oncoming wave. He didn't brace himself. He simply focused his will. He did not push. He did not block. He soothed. He reached out with his senses, touching the frantic energy of every molecule in the wave, and he whispered a silent, elemental command: be still. The effect was instantaneous and utterly surreal. The roaring, boiling wave did not crash or break. It visibly lost its energy in mid-charge. The violent churning smoothed out. The deafening hiss of steam subsided. The 10-foot wall of death sagged, its momentum bleeding away into nothingness, until it transformed into a vast, gentle cloud of warm, harmless steam that drifted around Naruto, enveloping him for a moment before dissipating into the already humid air. It was the elemental equivalent of calming a charging beast with a gentle touch. It was a display of control so fine, so absolute, that it bordered on the divine. Harribel's hand, holding her Zanpakuto, trembled for a fraction of a second. She had put the power of a star into that Sero. She unleashed a current hot enough to melt steel. He had negated both without taking a single step, without any visible effort at all. Naruto lowered his hand. Is that enough? He asked, his voice calm, holding no trace of arrogance. I told you, I don't want to fight. He then turned his back on her, an act of supreme, unguarded confidence, and walked to the edge of the lake. He knelt, dipping his fingers into the water that she had just tried to use to kill him. A soft, azure light spread from his fingertips, suffusing the lake. You see power as a weapon to destroy, Naruto said, his voice carrying across the water. A tool for conquest, or survival. That's all you've ever known, isn't it? Harribel watched, silent, as the murky brown water of the lake began to change. The silt and algae dissolved, the water becoming so perfectly clear that the stones on the lakebed were visible as if through flawless glass. The fish that had been flopping on the exposed ground when the lake parted, now stunned and dying, began to stir. Their wounds healed, their energy returned, and they began to swim with a new vitality. The azure glow spread from the lake, seeping into the shore. The trampled and blackened leaves at the water's edge began to change. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the soil with audible speed. They grew, unfurling into leaves and stems, and then bursting into a riot of color. Within seconds, a meadow of blue and white wildflowers, their petals jeweled with perfect dewdrops, surrounded the spot where Naruto knelt. The air, once thick with the smell of ozone and burnt leaves, now filled with their delicate fragrance. He had answered her power of destruction with an irrefutable demonstration of the power of creation. The sound of a sword sliding into its heath was loud in the sudden tranquility. Harribel stood on the water, her blade now secured on her back, her posture no longer confrontational, but contemplative. She looked from the impossible meadow of flowers to the boy who had created it. She had crossed worlds seeking the source of an anomaly, expecting to find a weapon, a monster, or a god of war. She had found a gardener, a life giver. No one, she said, her voice quiet, stripped of its earlier challenge, has ever wielded power like that. Aizen spoke of transcendence, of creating a new world from the ashes of the old. But he only ever knew how to make ashes. She walked across the water and stepped onto the shore, into the field of flowers he had made. She stood before him, a queen before a force she could not hope to conquer, and for the first time, did not feel the desire to try. What are you? She asked again, but this time the question was different. It was not a demand. It was a genuine, humble request for understanding. Naruto rose and turned to face her. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. This power, it's new. I don't fully understand it myself. He looked at the flowers at his feet, a flicker of his old sadness in his azure eyes. It woke up when my friends were dying. It took away the monsters who killed them. But it feels lonely. He met her gaze, and in her jade eyes, he saw not a predator, but a fellow sovereign. One who understood the crushing weight of responsibility. You have people you want to protect, don't you? That's why you came here. You sensed a power that could threaten them. Harribel gave a single, curt nod. My fracken. They are all I have. In my world, Hueco Mundo, the hollow desert, there is no creation. There is only consumption. The strong devour the weak to survive. It is an endless, meaningless cycle of sacrifice. I seek to break it. I seek a world where we do not have to live in fear of being prey. Then we want the same thing, Naruto said simply. It was at that moment that the forest erupted with movement. A dozen figures in white porcelain masks and black cloaks dropped from the trees, surrounding the pair in a silent, deadly perimeter. Kunai were drawn. Killing intent, cold and sharp, flooded the clearing. Kakashi, flanked by Jiraiya and Tsunade, stepped out from the trees, his face grim. Naruto, step away from the intruder, Kakashi commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. His hand was already crackling with the lightning of a Reikiri. Harribel's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her sword, her posture instantly shifting back to that of a warrior queen ready for battle. But Naruto didn't move away. Instead, he took a step to the side, placing himself partially between Harribel and the assembled Konoha shinobi. "Stand down," he said, his voice ice quiet but ringing with an authority that made even Tsunade pause. "She is not an enemy. Naruto, that thing is not human." Tsunade shot back. "Its energy is monstrous. We don't know what it is or what it wants." "I do," Naruto replied, never taking his eyes off his sensei. "She's a leader, who crossed worlds alone because she sensed a potential threat to her people. She's a protector." He glanced back at Harribel, who was watching him, her expression unreadable behind her mask. "She's like me." He then turned fully to Harribel, ignoring the dozen blades aimed at his back. He extended a hand, not in attack or defense, but as a gesture of offering. "You want to protect your world. I want to protect mine," he said, his voice clear and strong in the tense clearing. "The predators, the ones who only know how to destroy and consume, they won't care about the borders between our homes. They will take whatever they want. Maybe it's time we stopped thinking about our worlds as separate." He held her gaze, his azure eyes honest and direct. "You're looking for another path. Maybe this is it. An alliance. We protect our people. Together." Harribel looked at his outstretched hand. She looked at the tense, hostile shinobi surrounding them. She looked at the impossible field of flowers at her feet. And she looked at the boy who wielded the power to unmake armies, and chose instead to create life. In his world, she was a monster, an intruder. Yet he stood before her, offering not chains or death, but a partnership of equals. He was offering her the one thing she had never thought to find: hope. She did not take his hand. Such a gesture was too familiar, too human. Instead, she gave a sharp, formal nod, a queen accepting the terms of a treaty. "Muy bien," she said, her voice firm. "Let us see if this path of yours bears fruit, Naruto Uzumaki." The pact was sealed, not with a handshake or a signature, but with a shared understanding in a field of impossible flowers, under the watchful eyes of two worlds colliding. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Deluge and the Dove. The air in the Hokage's office was thick with the ghosts of past decisions. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, forgotten crisis. Before the desk stood a collection of the most powerful and dangerous people in Konoha, their collective presence creating a pressure that felt more palpable than the humid summer air outside. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, sat behind the mountain of paperwork, her hands steepled before her, her expression a mask of hardened steel. Jiraiya leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his usual roguish demeanor absent, replaced by a grim watchfulness. Kakashi stood at attention, his posture relaxed but his visible eye sharp and analytical. And in the corner, casting long shadows that the sunlight could not seem to touch, were the elders. Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Udatane, their faces etched with the severe lines of a lifetime of political pragmatism. And Danzo Shimura, his cane planted firmly on the floor, his bandaged eye and the unyielding set of his jaw radiating a chilling, predatory stillness. "The creature must be detained," Danzo stated, his voice a dry rasp, devoid of emotion. "Its biology, its method of dimensional travel, the nature of its spiritual energy, it represents a wealth of strategic intelligence we cannot afford to ignore. To allow it to walk freely within our walls is an act of gross negligence." "She is a guest," Tsunade countered, her voice dangerously low. "An envoy from Aneth, world who came here under a flag of truce, however unconventional. We will not greet a potential ally with shackles and scalpels, Danzo." "Ally?" Kaharu scoffed, her tone sharp as broken glass. "It is a monster, Tsunade. A hollow. By Jiraiya's own admission from his intelligence networks. A soul-eating demon. You would ally Konoha with such a thing based on the word of an unstable Jinchuriki. That unstable Jinchuriki neutralized an army of mercenaries and rogue shinobi, including a Konoha exile, without a single friendly casualty," Kakashi interjected, his voice level and cool. "He then faced this monster, and, through a display of power that beggars belief, forced a de-escalation and forged a pact. His judgment in this matter has earned a measure of trust. Trust is a luxury, Danzo said, his single eye narrowing. Control is a necessity. The boy's new power is a variable we have not yet quantified. It is far too great to be left to the whims of a child. It, and this creature he has befriended, must be brought under strict Konoha authority. My root division is equipped for such a task. A vein throbbed in Tsunade's forehead. You will keep your shadow soldiers away from them both, Danzo. Or I will personally dismantle root brick by brick. This is my decision. We are in a new age. The old rules, the old enmities, may no longer apply. This, Tier Harribel, represents not just a threat, but an opportunity. To show strength not through aggression, but through statesmanship. Tsunade stood, her presence filling the room. Jiraiya's intelligence on the Akatsuki has grown dire. They are mobilizing. Iwagakure is suspicious of us after the incident in the Land of Waves. Kumo is posturing on our borders. We are beset by sharks, and we cannot afford to bleed. This alliance, however strange, is a new piece on the board. And we are going to use it. She fixed her gaze on Jiraiya, then Naruto, who had been standing silently by the window, listening. There is one nation that remains a complete enigma, Amegakure. A closed, militarized state ruled by a man they call a god, Pain. The leader of the Akatsuki. It is a viper's nest, and I intend to walk right into it. A diplomatic mission to Amegakure. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up. Tsunade, that's suicide. They kill anyone who approaches their borders. They won't kill you, Tsunade said, her lips twisting into a grim smile. Not when you're accompanied by an ambassador who can part oceans and a Jinchuriki who is the living embodiment of a primordial god. This is a power play. We will approach them, gauge their intentions, and offer them a choice. Stand with the new order we are building, or be recognized as the enemy of it. She looked directly at Naruto. The weight of her gaze was heavy, not just with the authority of a Hokage, but with a plea. This mission falls to you, Naruto. You are no longer just a genin. You are the fulcrum upon which the world's balance now rests. You will go with Jiraiya. And you will take your new ally with you. Show them what you are. Show them the power of Konoha. Naruto looked out the window at the peaceful village below. He could feel the Uchiha compound, a place of quiet ghosts. He could feel the academy, bustling with the vibrant, hopeful energy of children. He felt the weight of it all, not as a burden to be carried, but as something precious to be shielded. He turned, his azure eyes holding a calm that was still unnerving to those who knew him best. I'll do it. The journey to the land of rain was a study in contrasts. The trio moved through the lush, sun-drenched forests of the land of fire, a world teeming with vibrant life. Jiraiya, ever the spymaster, used the travel time to observe and question. He spoke with Harribel, his questions about Hawako Mundo, Aizen, and the nature of her power couched in lewd jokes and folksy charm. Harribel's answers were concise, clipped, and offered little beyond the barest of facts, her stoicism an unbreakable wall against his probing. She, in turn, spent most of her time observing Naruto. She watched as he walked, his senses clearly extended far beyond the norm. She saw the way his eyes would track the flow of a river they were crossing. The way he would look up at the clouds as if reading a language only he could understand. She felt the constant, low-level thrum of his power, a calm, life-affirming energy that was so fundamentally different from the sharp, jagged ryutsu of her world. It was like walking beside a living, breathing sea. Naruto himself was quiet, lost in his own world. The journey was a constant exercise in control. He felt every underground spring, every stream, the water within every leaf of every tree. He was learning to filter, to categorize, to build mental dams that kept the sensory flood from overwhelming him. He was learning the geography of his own power, and the sheer scale of it was humbling. The change began 50 miles from the border. The sky, once a brilliant blue, began to pale, acquiring a flat, metallic sheen. The lush green of the forest gave way to stunted, twisted trees and marshy swampland. And then, the rain began. It was not a normal rain. It fell in a steady, monotonous drizzle from a sky of perpetual twilight. The drops were heavy, almost oily, and they struck the ground not with a refreshing patter, but with a mournful, weary sigh. The air grew thick with the smell of wet metal, rust, and a faint, chemical bitterness. This was a rain that did not cleanse, it stained. Soon, the city appeared on the horizon, a jagged silhouette against the bruised sky. A megacar. It was less a village and more a colossal, metallic organism. Dozens of skyscrapers, impossibly tall and slender, pierced the low-hanging clouds, their surfaces streaked with rust and grime. A chaotic web of pipes, ducts, and cables ran between the towers, like the veins and arteries of a steel beast. Water gushed from gargoyles, cascaded down drainage channels, and dripped from every surface, creating a constant, cacophonous symphony of falling water. Charming place, Jiraiya muttered, pulling the collar of his coat tighter. Always looks like it's weeping. As They passed through the immense outer gates, the feeling of being watched was immediate and suffocating. There were no guards to be seen, no people on the wide, rain-slicked streets. But Naruto could feel them. He could sense the hundreds of life signs, the warm-blooded vessels of water and chakra, hidden behind the steel-shuttered windows of the towering apartments, their eyes following the intruders. The entire city was a fortress. Its populace a silent, hidden garrison. They were met by a single figure, clad in the standard AIM flak jacket and a breathing mask that obscured their face. The shinobi said nothing, simply beckoned with a single hand before turning and leading them into the labyrinthine heart of the city. They walked in silence, the only sounds their footsteps echoing in the steel canyons and the endless, depressing drumbeat of the rain. It was a calculated display of intimidation, meant to unnerve and isolate. They were led into the tallest of the towers, a structure that seemed to scrape the very belly of the clouds. An industrial lift carried them upwards in a slow, groaning ascent. As they rose, Naruto closed his eyes, his senses reaching out. He felt the chakra in the rain. And it was just as he'd expected, only stronger here, at the epicenter. It was a powerful, immense chakra, but it was saturated with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight. It was the energy of a wound that had never healed. The lift doors opened into a vast, circular chamber. And Naruto understood why this city felt so wounded. The entire room was crafted from paper. Countless sheets, folded and woven with impossible artistry, formed the walls, the ceiling, even the furniture. And at the center of the room, seated upon a massive, throne-like flower of white paper, was a woman with calm, amethyst eyes and straight, blue hair, a single, perfect paper flower adorning her head. She was an angel in a paper heaven, and her face was a mask of serene, impenetrable melancholy. This was Konan. Jiraiya-sensei, she said, her voice a soft, rustling whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It has been a long time. I see you have brought monsters to our land. Her gaze flicked to Harribel, cold and dismissive, before settling on Naruto, her eyes filled with a guarded curiosity. Konan, Jiraiya said, his voice heavy with a history she could not see. I didn't come here to fight. We came to talk. Pain is the one who speaks for this village, Konan replied, her expression unchanging. I am merely his messenger. He wishes to know why Konoha sends a Sanin, a Jinchuriki, and a demon to his city. Harribel's spiritual pressure flared for a brief, cold moment at the insult, but she remained silent, her jade eyes fixed on the paper angel. We come to speak of peace, Jiraiya said. Konan's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. Peace. An amusing word, coming from a shinobi of the leaf. Your village speaks of peace while sharpening its fangs. You taught us that. The world taught us that. We have learned our lessons well. We have found our own path to peace. A path that involves hunting down Jinchuriki and gathering beasts of mass destruction. Jiraiya countered, his tone hardening. That is not a path to peace, Konan. That is a path to war. War is the catalyst, she said, her amethyst eyes distant. Only through shared, universal pain will humanity finally understand the true meaning of peace. When the world knows a suffering so great that the very thought of conflict becomes unbearable, there will be a true and lasting cessation of all hostilities. Pain will deliver that suffering. He will become the god of a world that has finally learned to fear itself. Naruto had been listening silently, his senses not on her words, but on the feeling behind them. He felt the absolute, unshakable conviction, but beneath it, he felt the sorrow, the same deep, aching sorrow that saturated the rain. He stepped forward. A peace built on fear isn't peace, he said. His voice quiet but clear in the rustling room. It's just a cage. The moment the fear fades, the fighting starts again. You're not ending the cycle of hatred. You're just becoming the biggest monster inside it. Conan's gaze shifted to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. You are a child who has known nothing but the protection of your village. You parrot words you do not understand. You cannot possibly comprehend our pain, or the necessity of our path. I don't need to, Naruto replied, taking another step. I can feel it. Your pain. It's in the rain. It's in every street, every tower. This whole city is drowning in sorrow. And you're trying to make the rest of the world drown with you. The statement struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her serene mask cracked, a flicker of shock showing in her eyes. How could he know that? How could he feel the very essence of their existence so keenly? Nagato. Pain. He pours his own heart into the sky, Naruto continued. His voice filled with a strange, profound empathy. He makes the world weep with him. But forcing everyone else to feel your pain won't heal your own wounds. It just makes new ones. You speak of healing. Conan's voice was laced with a bitter, cold anger. The great nations burn our homes, kill our families, and then send children to lecture us on healing. You offer no solutions, only empty words. You cannot understand our pain. The words hung in the air, a final, definitive declaration. Naruto met her gaze, his azure eyes filled not with anger or pity, but with a deep, resonant calm. No, he said softly. You're right. I can't understand it. He closed his eyes. But I can help you wash it away. He didn't make a hand sign. He didn't gather chakra in a flashy display. He simply stood there, in the heart of the paper sanctuary, and reached out with his entire being. He reached past the city, past the weeping sky, and touched the colossal, super-saturated storm system that had been Nagato's permanent creation. A monument to his unending grief. He felt the thick, bitter chakra clinging to every water molecule. He felt the echoes of Yahiko's death, of 1,000 betrayals. Of a dream that had curdled into a nightmare. He did not fight it. He did not overpower it. He simply introduced a new element into the system. His own chakra, pure, calm, and brimming with the primordial concept of life, flowed from him like a river of clean water pouring into a stagnant sea. On the window of the paper throne room, the endless drizzle began to change. The heavy, gray drops became lighter, clearer. The oppressive, metallic scent in the air began to fade, replaced by the clean, fresh smell of pure rain. Conan watched, her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the change. The very soul of her world was being altered. The familiar, sorrowful chakra she had known her entire life was being diluted, cleansed. Below, in the streets of Omegakure, the change was more dramatic. The torrential downpour softened to a gentle shower. The perpetual gloom of the sky began to thin. A pale, watery light began to filter through the clouds. Then, with the silent, breathtaking force of a miracle, a single, brilliant ray of sunlight pierced the gray veil. It struck the side of the central tower, a spear of impossible gold against the weeping steel. Then another followed, and another. The clouds began to part. For the first time in decades, the sun shone on the village hidden in the rain. Light flooded Conan's paper sanctuary, making the white walls almost blindingly bright. She stumbled back, her hand flying up to shield her eyes, not just from the light, but from the sheer, world-shattering impossibility of it. Across the city, doors and windows that had been sealed for years creaked open. The people of AIM, the hidden watchers, stepped out onto their balconies, their faces pale and stunned. They stared up at the impossible blue spreading across their sky, at the olden warmth of a sun they had only known from stories. An elderly woman began to weep silently. A child, who had never seen the sun before, laughed and pointed, his voice a clear, bright sound in a city that had forgotten how to rejoice. Conan fell to her knees. She crawled to the window, her hands pressing against the sun-warmed glass. Tears, her own tears, streamed down her face, but for the first time. They were not in harmony with the rain. They were hers alone. He had not defeated her with a jutsu. He had not bested her with logic. He had, with a single, gentle act, dismantled the entire foundation of her world. Their pain, the sacred, defining principle of their existence, the fuel for their righteous crusade, had just been washed away by a boy with eyes like the calm sea. If a Sophie of healing could wield such power, such grace, what did that make their philosophy of pain? Naruto stood in the center of the sun-drenched room, the light catching in his hair, turning it to gold. He looked at the broken, weeping angel at his feet, his expression one of quiet empathy. I'm not here to be your enemy, Conan, he said, his voice soft enough to not disturb the sacred silence. I'm here to offer you a different way. She looked up at him, her amethyst eyes wide with 1,000 new, terrifying questions. The seed of doubt had been planted, not with a whisper, but with the undeniable, brilliant light of the dawn. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Pact of Stone and Water. The Tsuchikage's office in Iwagakure was a chamber carved from the mountain's heart, a place where the air itself felt heavy and ancient. There were no windows. Light came from glowing, chakra-infused crystals embedded in the stone ceiling, casting a stark, unblinking light on the grim proceedings. It was a room that had seen declarations of war, mourned the loss of generations of shinobi, and held the stubborn, unyielding pride of the land of Earth for nearly a century. Today, it was a room of disbelief. The spy, a seasoned Jonin from Iwa's intelligence division, was kneeling on the cold stone floor. His uniform was still damp, not from the rain of aim, but from the sweat of a frantic, non-stop journey. He was trembling, his voice strained with a mixture of fear and awe that infuriated his leader. Repeat what you said, Onoki, the third Tsuchikage, commanded. He floated cross-legged behind his massive stone desk, his diminutive form seeming to vibrate with barely contained outrage. The rain, Lord Third, it stopped, the spy stammered, his eyes fixed on the floor. One moment, the city was under its eternal storm. The next, the clouds parted. The sun, by the stones, we saw the sun. The Konoha delegation was inside the central tower when it happened. It was the Jinchuriki. It had to be. A heavy silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint grinding of Onoki's teeth. Kuretsuchi stood beside the desk, her arms crossed, her usually sharp and confident features clouded with a deep, analytical frown. Her father, Kitsuchi, a mountain of a man with a steady, dependable presence, stood impassively by the wall, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his hands behind his back. First, a power surge in the land of waves that vaporizes an army and registers on every sensor on the continent, Onoki rasped, his voice like rocks tumbling downhill. Now, they possess the ability to command the climate of an entire nation. This isn't a jutsu, this is a force of nature. Konoha has developed a weapon that makes the tailed beasts look like children's firecrackers. His old eyes, clouded with the cataracts of age and the bitterness of old wars, burned with a furious light. This is the arrogance of the leaf. They've always been like this. That brat's father, the Yellow Flash, he humiliated us in the last war. He danced through our best defenses like they were nothing. Now his son wields a power that can turn our farmlands to desert or our mines to mud-filled pits from 100 miles away. This is an existential threat to Iwagakure. A direct assault is out of the question, Kuretsuchi said, her voice cutting through her grandfather's tirade. Her pragmatism was the cold, hard edge that so often tempered his fiery rage. We know nothing about the specifics of this power, its range, its cost, or its limitations. To declare war on the basis of this report would be to charge blind into a minefield. So we do nothing, Onoki snarled. We sit here and wait for the leaf to hold a flood over our heads and demand our surrender. No, Kuretsuchi said, a dangerous glint entering her eyes. We don't wait for them to bring the threat to us. We go out and meet it. The delegation will have to travel back from AIM. They'll pass through the neutral territories bordering our lands. It's home turf. Rock, stone, and canyons. A place where our Earth style is supreme. She unfolded her arms and leaned over the desk, her gaze locking with her grandfather's. Let me take the 1st Division. Father can provide heavy support. We won't invade the land of fire. We will intercept them on neutral ground. A border patrol that happens upon them by chance. We won't try to kill them. We'll test them. A show of Iwa's strength. We'll see what this weapon is made of, how it responds to our techniques. We need to know what we are facing. Words are cheap. Information is ammunition. Onoki stared at his granddaughter, a slow, grudging smile spreading across his wrinkled face. Her ferocity and cunning were the pride of his old age. She was Aiwa's future, forged in the same stubborn, unyielding stone as he was. Kitsuchi, he barked. You will go with her. Your command. Kitsuchi bowed his head. Yes, father. But he was looking at his daughter. No, Kuretsuchi stated, not looking away from the Tsuchikage. I led. Father provides the muscle. This needs a sharp edge, not a hammer. Kitsuchi's lips twitched into a proud smile. Onoki's grin widened. Very well. Go. Remind the leaf what happens when they tread too close to our mountains. Remind them of the will of stone. The borderlands between the land of fire and the land of earth were a testament to geological violence. It was a desolate, windswept expanse of towering mesas, deep canyons, and jagged rock formations that clawed at the sky. The wind was a constant, abrasive presence, carrying a fine grit that stung the eyes and scoured the landscape into brutal, abstract shapes. There was no softness here. Everything was hard angles, cracked earth, and the stubborn tenacity of the few twisted, wiry shish rubs that clung to life in the rock faces. This was Iwagakure's soul, made manifest in terrain. From a high ledge, Kuretsuchi surveyed their work. Below, the canyon floor looked undisturbed, a natural, chaotic jumble of boulders and scree. But it was a lie. For the past 12 hours, her division, the most elite earth movers in Iwagakure, had been reshaping the battlefield. The ground was riddled with hidden pitfalls. Sharpened rock spikes lay buried just beneath a thin crust of earth, and entire cliff faces were primed to collapse on her command. Her father, Kitsuchi, had orchestrated the larger movements. His hands molding the earth like a potter shaping clay, creating a massive, comprehensive death trap. They are 2 hours out, an Aiwa sensor reported, appearing beside her in a shimmer of earth-styled camouflage. 3 signatures. The Sanin, the Jinchuriki, and the otherworldly anomaly. Their pace is steady. Good, Kuretsuchi said, a smirk playing on her lips. Let them walk right into the serpent's mouth. This power of theirs may command the sky, but down here, on the ground, the very stone is our ally. They won't know what hit them. 2 hours later, 3 figures appeared at the mouth of the canyon. They moved with an unhurried, confident pace that grated on Kuretsuchi's nerves. Jiraiya, the toad sage. The strange, white-clad woman with the bone mask. And in the center, the blonde Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki. They walked another 50 yards into the canyon, right into the heart of the kill zone. Kuretsuchi raised her hand, ready to give the signal to spring the trap. Then, the boy stopped. He held up a hand, and his 2 companions halted instantly. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted as if listening to something. Kuretsuchi's eyes narrowed. He was looking around, but his gaze was unfocused. On the canyon floor, Naruto closed his eyes. The constant hum of the world's water was his sixth sense. He had felt the change the moment they'd entered the canyon. The subtle shifts in the underground water table, the pockets of unnatural dryness where the earth had been moved and compacted, the faint traces of moisture from the breath of 24 shinobi hiding behind rocks. The earth was screaming that it had been violated. They're waiting for us, Naruto said, his voice calm, carrying easily on the wind. About 25 of them. Dug in. The whole canyon is a trap. Jiraiya sighed, scratching the back of his head. So much for a quiet trip home. I was never been subtle. Harribel's hand rested on the hilt of her Zanpakuto. Their spiritual pressure is like gravel. Crude and abrasive. High above, Kuretsuchi's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl of pure frustration. Their meticulously prepared ambush, their greatest advantage, had been rendered useless before it had even begun. The boy had sensed them. How? So much for the subtle approach, she muttered, her pride stung. She stood up, stepping into plain sight on the canyon ledge. Sharp senses, Konoha dog. She shouted, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. One by one, the Aiwa shinobi emerged from their hiding places, their tan and brown uniforms blending perfectly with the rock. They were hard-faced men and women. The elite of a village known for its toughness. Kitsuchi appeared on an adjacent ledge, his massive arms crossed, his presence as solid and imposing as the mesa he stood upon. Kuretsuchi, granddaughter of the Tsuchikage, Jiraiya said, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. To what do we owe the honor of this welcoming party? Spare me the pleasantries, Sanin, she shot back. her voice dripping with scorn. Iwa has questions. We hear Konoha has a new pet, one that can make the sky obey. We don't take kindly to neighbors who build weapons that can threaten our very existence. So we're here for a demonstration. Show us this power. Show us if it can stand against the might of Iwa's stone. She didn't wait for an answer. She made a single, sharp hand gesture. Now, Kitsuchi slammed his palms together. Earth style. Fisher of the Mountain Lord. The ground beneath the Konoha trio didn't just shake, it split. A massive chasm ripped through the canyon floor, aiming to swallow them whole. It was a jutsu of overwhelming scale and power. But Naruto was ready. As the earth tore itself apart, he stomped his own foot on the ground. He didn't try to stop the fissure. He simply poured his chakra into the earth, not to move it, but to change it. He reached down, deep down, with his senses, and found the hidden aquifers, the deep, ancient inns of water that ran through the bedrock. And he pulled. Water erupted from the ground. Not in a geyser, but everywhere at once. The dry, cracked earth became saturated. The solid rock softened. The chasm that Kitsuchi had created became not a deadly fall, but a bubbling, muddy trench. The entire canyon floor, in a matter of seconds, was transformed from solid ground into a deep, grasping, treacherous quagmire of thick mud. The Iwa shinobi, poised to charge, found their feet sinking, their movements sluggish. Their earth-style jutsu, which required a stable connection to the ground, sputtered and failed. Their greatest strength, the very terrain they commanded, had been turned against them. From Kitsuchi's ledge, he stared in shock. His grand, earth-shattering technique had been neutralized so casually, so fundamentally. He liquefied the bedrock. Don't just stand there, you idiots. It's just mud. Kuretsuchi screamed, furious. But it wasn't just mud. A fine, misty rain, conjured from the humidity in the air, began to fall. As the mist mingled with the heat of the arid landscape, a thick, disorienting fog began to rise from the mud, blanketing the entire canyon in a pearly white shroud. Vision was reduced to less than 5 feet. Panic began to set in among the Iwa forces. They were earth movers, used to clear lines of sight and solid footing. In this wet, blind, unstable world, they were lost. Naruto, however, could see everything. Through the water of the fog, the rain, and the mud, he had a perfect, three-dimensional image of every shinobi in the canyon. He became a ghost in his own mist. A Jonin, trying to pull his feet free from the mud, suddenly found his arms pinned to his side by whips of high-pressure water that shot from the fog. He was disarmed and immobilized before he even saw his attacker. Another pair, standing back to back, were suddenly encased from the waist down in jagged pillars of ice, flash frozen from the mud on their own uniforms. The takedowns were silent, precise, and brutally efficient. Jiraiya and Harribel moved at the edges of the fog, acting as a rearguard, easily deflecting the few panicked, blind attacks that came their way, and subduing any who strayed too far from the main group. It was not a battle, it was a systematic dismantling. Kitsuchi roared in frustration from his ledge. Earth style. Rising rock spikes. Dozens of stone spikes erupted from the canyon walls, shooting blindly into the fog. Naruto didn't even turn. He simply waved a hand, and a swirling shield of water intercepted each spike, eroding their NTS to dust before they could find a target. Father! No! You can't see! Kuretsuchi yelled, but it was too late. Naruto used the sound of his jutsu to pinpoint him. A massive hand of mud and water erupted from the cliff face beneath Kitsuchi, grabbing the giant shinobi and pinning him against the rock, his powerful arms trapped in the crushing, semi-liquid grip. In less than 5 minutes, the entire 1st Division of Iwagakure was neutralized, non-lethally. The fog began to recede, but not everywhere. It pulled back with deliberate intent, clearing a circular arena in the center of the canyon. In it stood Naruto. The mist then parted on the far side, revealing a single, isolated figure, Kuretsuchi. She stood there, breathing heavily, her face a mask of incandescent fury, surrounded by the sight of her defeated, mud-caked comrades. She seethed, her pride utterly shattered. You think this is clever? Hiding in the mist like a coward. It's not hiding, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the quiet canyon. It's using the terrain. With a scream of rage, Kuretsuchi flashed through hand seals. Lava release. Scorching rocks jutsu. She spat a volley of molten globules, each one glowing with the heat of a miniature sun. They flew at Naruto, sizzling through the air. He didn't move to dodge. He simply raised a hand. A perfect, swirling shield of water, spinning at immense speed, formed before him. The lava rocks struck the shield and were instantly cooled, their fiery energy extinguished with a violent hiss. They didn't even shatter. The thermal shock was so great they turned to brittle black obsidian and then disintegrated into fine, glassy dust against the water's unyielding surface. Kuretsuchi stared, aghast. Her village's ultimate offensive weapon, the combination of earth and fire, had been negated as if it were a child's firecracker. Naruto let the shield dissolve and began to walk towards her. The mud firmed beneath his feet, creating a solid path for him alone. He stopped 10 feet away from her, just out of reach. His azure eyes held no malice, only a deep, weary disappointment. This is what Iwa respects. Brute force? He asked, his voice quiet but cutting. Your grandfather is a great man, a hero of his village. But he lives in the past. He's still fighting a war against my father, a man who's been dead for over a dozen years. He taught you to hate Konoha, to see us as the enemy. He gestured to the defeated shinobi around them. You're strong. Your whole village is strong. But you're using that strength to prop up old hatreds, to replay old wars. Is that all Iwa has left? Is that the future you want for your people? To send your best shinobi to die on desolate borders over ghosts and rumors? He took another step. I didn't ask for this power. But it's shown me that the world is bigger than just our villages. The enemies who are coming, the real ones, they won't care if you're from Iwa or Konoha. It's time we stopped fighting each other and started working together. Kuretsuchi stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Everything he said, every infuriatingly calm word, struck a chord of truth within her pragmatic heart. They had come here with every advantage. Terrain, numbers, surprise, and they had been dismantled, not by a demon or a monster, but by a strategist who had used their own element against them. Go back, Naruto said, his voice softening slightly. Go back and tell your Tsuchikage what you saw. Tell him that Konoha's power isn't for destroying nations, it's for protecting them. Tell him we're building alliances, not armies. The next time we meet, it can be at a negotiating table instead of a battlefield. He held her gaze for a final moment. The choice is yours, Kuretsuchi. He then turned his back on her and walked away. The mist parting before him and closing behind him, as if to grant him passage. Jiraiya and Harribel fell in step beside him, and together, the three of them disappeared into the fog. Leaving Kuretsuchi alone in the mud and the silence, surrounded by the wreckage of her pride. She stared at the spot where he had vanished, her fists clenched so tightly her nails drew blood. She was furious. She was humiliated. And, most infuriatingly of all, she was impressed. She was a pragmatist. And the pragmatism of the situation was undeniable. Iwagakure was not ready for this new world. A pact of stone and water. The idea was absurd. But as she looked at the liquefied earth around her, she began to wonder if stone could afford to be so stubborn when the tide was rising this high. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Shadow and the Cleansing Tide. The new Konoha had a different energy. Enko Mitarashi could feel it in her bones, a low, persistent thrum in the air. Like a power line humming just beyond the range of hearing. She'd initially dismissed it as a side effect of the village's collective anxiety. The return of the Uzumaki brat, trailing whispers of godlike power and with an otherworldly ice queen in tow, had sent the rumor mill into overdrive. But this was different. It was a tangible, ambient pressure that made the hairs on her arms stand up and the curse seal on her neck itch with a faint, familiar heat. She ignored it, as she ignored most things that couldn't be fought, eaten, or flirted with. She channeled her restless energy the why she always did, with controlled violence. Come on, you maggots. She roared, a wide, feral grin splitting her face. My grandmother moves faster than you lot, and she's been dead for 20 years. She blurred across Training Ground 3, a whirlwind of motion. She sidestepped a clumsy lunge from a Chunin, hooked her leg around his, and sent him spinning into his teammate. She danced between their flailing attacks. Her movements economical and predatory, a flash of a kunai here, a sharp elbow to the ribs there. For Anko, combat was a form of meditation, a loud, chaotic, and satisfying way to silence the whispers in the back of her mind. Today, however, the whispers were getting louder. The hum in the air seemed to resonate with the mark on her neck. The faint itch intensified into a tingling heat, a precursor to the pain she knew so well. She gritted her teeth, pushing through it, dispatching the last of the Chunin with a swift kick that sent him tumbling into the dirt. Pathetic, she laughed, planting her hands on her hips as she surveyed the groaning pile of her sparring partners. 10 minutes. A new record for incompetence. Hit the show. The word died in her throat, strangled by a sudden, blinding spike of agony. It was not the familiar, dull ache of the cursed seal. This was a searing, white-hot poker stabbing into the base of her skull. Her vision swam, the vibrant green of the training ground dissolving into a nauseating, gray blur. The black tomo pattern on her neck flared with a malevolent, purple light, and she could feel it, an alien, hungry consciousness, stirring within her. And no, she gasped, clutching at her neck. The tomo markings began to writhe, spreading across her skin like tendrils of living ink. It felt like snakes uncoiling beneath her flesh, their fangs sinking into her soul. She fell to her knees with a choked scream, the sound ripped from her lungs. The serpent was waking up. The atmosphere in the Konoha hospital's secure wing was one of controlled panic. The room was a sterile white box, reinforced with steel and lined with the most powerful suppression seals in the village's arsenal. They were useless. The paper tags, inscribed with potent fuinjutsu, sizzled and blackened the moment they were applied to Anko's skin, consumed by the voracious, dark chakra that was pouring from her cursed seal. Anko was strapped to a reinforced medical bed, but she thrashed against the restraints with inhuman strength, her body contorting as waves of agony washed over her. Her skin was pale and clammy, her teeth bared in a permanent snarl of pain. The black markings had spread up her neck and across her left cheek, twisting her features into a grotesque parody of herself. Her vitals are crashing. A medic shouted over Anko's guttural screams. Chakra levels are spiking beyond Jonin level. The seal it's trying to consume her chakra network. Tsunade stood by the bed, her face grim, her hands glowing with the green light of the mystical palm technique. She poured her own chakra into Anko, healing the cellular damage as fast as the seal could cause it, but it was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole the size of her fist. She was treating the symptoms, not the disease. It's not responding to any of the suppression protocols, Tsunade growled, her knuckles white. The chakra is too dense, too malevolent. It's actively devouring the seals. Jiraiya stood by the door, his arms crossed, his expression darker than anyone had seen it in years. Orochimaru designed these seals to be a gateway, a method to forcefully court his own corrupted senjutsu into a host. But I've never seen one activate so aggressively without his direct influence. It's the ambient energy in the village, Tsunade said, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. It has to be. Ever since Naruto and that Arankar woman returned, the background chakra levels in Konoha have increased threefold. The energy is rich, powerful, and it's acting like fertilizer on Orochimaru's twisted little garden. So the very power protecting the village is inadvertently killing one of its own, Jiraiya mused, his gaze heavy with irony. What are our options? There are none, Tsunade admitted, her voice raw with frustration. We can't remove the seal. The process would kill her. We can't suppress it. All I can do is keep her alive while it eats her from the inside out. She slammed a fist against the metal wall, leaving a sizable dent. For the legendary Sannin, the greatest medical ninja in the world, the helplessness was a bitter poison. She stared at the spreading black markings, at the chaotic, fiery energy they represented. Fire. An idea, desperate and wildly dangerous, began to form in her mind. A hypothesis born from the edge of despair. Quote, Orochimaru's power is a mockery of nature energy, she said, thinking aloud. Senjutsu, but corrupted, twisted. It's an energy of imbalance, of ambition. She looked at Jiraiya, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying thought. Naruto's power. What did the report from the Land of Waves say? It wasn't just destructive. It was creative. It made things grow. It's a primordial energy. A pure, balancing force of nature. Jiraiya's eyes widened as he followed her logic. Fire and water. You think his chakra could counteract the seal? Or it could supercharge it and cause her to explode like a bomb, Tsunade finished grimly. His chakra is a pure life essence. Orochimaru's is a parasitic one. What happens when the two meet? Will one pacify the other, or will they annihilate each other, taking Anko with them? It's a gamble on a scale I can't even calculate. She looked at Anko, whose screams were weakening into pained, breathless whimpers. Her life was fading. The gamble was insane, but it was the only one they had left. Get him, she commanded a nearby Anbu. Get Naruto Uzumaki. Now. The underground facility was cold. The air tasted of sterile metal, ozone, and fear. The corridor walls were solid steel, designed to contain the rage of a tailed beast. Naruto walked through them, flanked by Jiraiya and Tsunade, the echo of their footsteps the only sound. When he entered the observation room, he saw her through the reinforced chakra glass. The sight of Anko, so often a whirlwind of boisterous, chaotic energy, now so broken and small on the medical bed, struck a deep, discordant chord within him. He could feel her pain, not just emotionally, but as a tangible, chaotic ripple in the water of her own body. Her life's tide was ebbing, disrupted by a venomous, fiery storm. Tsunade explained the situation, her voice clinical and precise, laying out the hypothesis and the monumental risks. Naruto listened, his azure eyes fixed on Anko's convulsing form. He heard the words, potential annihilation, unforeseeable consequences, but they were just noise. All he could feel was her suffering. I'll do it, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He entered the containment chamber alone. The heavy steel door sealed behind him with a final, tomb-like thud. The air in the room was thick with the smell of burnt paper from the failed seals and the raw, acrid stench of dark chakra. Anko's pained whimpers were the only sound. He walked to her bedside. The curse seal was a hideous, living tattoo, pulsing with a sick purple light. He could feel its will, a hungry, serpentine thing coiled around her soul, whispering promises of power in exchange for her submission. It was the echo of a monster, left to fester in a wound that never closed. Gently, he placed one hand on her sweat-drenched forehead, the other on her stomach. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sterile white room, and reached inward, not with his hands, but with his senses. He plunged into the storm of her existence. Pain, fire, a screaming, endless inferno that had been her constant companion for more than a decade. The fire had a voice. It was his voice. Orochimaru. You have such potential, Anko-chan. Such a resilient vessel. Let me fill you with power. Let me give you purpose. The memory was as fresh as yesterday. The dark, musty lab. The cold, metallic taste of the instruments. The feeling of his fangs, sharp and cold, sinking into her neck. And then the fire, pouring into her, branding her not just on her skin, but on her very soul. The serpent uncoiled in her mind, its scales the color of midnight. Its eyes chips of malevolent amber. It was the will of the seal, the piece of Orochimaru's soul he had left inside her. It hissed and whispered, its voice mingling with her own pain. They cannot help you. They are weak. Your pain is your strength. Embrace it. Let me in. Let me consume your weakness, and together, we will show them true power. We will burn this world to the ground. She fought it, as she had always fought it. She clawed at it, screamed at it, but it was a part of her. It was a battle in a locked room with no escape. The fire burned hotter, the serpent's coils tightened. And she could feel herself slipping, her will eroding under the relentless assault. She was so tired of fighting. And then, through the roaring inferno, through the serpent's seductive hiss, she felt something new. It was a touch, and then a sensation, so alien to this internal hell that it shocked her into a moment of lucidity. It was coolness. It was not the cold of the lab table or the icy dread of fear. It was a profound, penetrating coolness, like diving into a deep, clear lake on the hottest day of summer. It started at her forehead and her stomach, 2 points of impossible, gentle relief. It didn't try to douse the fire. It simply was a presence of absolute calm in the heart of the maelstrom. Naruto could see it all. Her chakra network was a raging, inflamed river of red, being strangled and consumed by a parasitic growth of black and purple fire. The curse seal. It was a chaotic, malignant entity, lashing out at her life force with mindless hunger. He began to channel his own chakra. It was not a flood, not a wave. It was a delicate, intricate process, like the most complex medical ninjutsu imaginable. His azure chakra, the vital tide, flowed from his hands. He used the water in her cells as a perfect, flawless conduit, weaving his energy into her system with microscopic precision. His chakra, a force of pure, balanced life, did not attack the seal. An attack would be a battle of force. One that would tear her apart. Instead, he did something else. His chakra flowed around the fiery tendrils of the cursed seal. It was like a cool, gentle river flowing around jagged, heated rocks. It soothed the inflammation of her chakra pathways. It created a buffer, a protective sheath of calm, life-affirming energy between the parasitic chakra and her own. He could feel the serpent's will. Its rage and hunger. He met it not with force, but with the vast, patient, and unyielding presence of a boundless ocean. He was not trying to kill the serpent, he was calming the storm in which it raged. Taking away the fire and fury that gave it strength. The coolness spread. Anko felt it flow through her veins, a gentle, cleansing tide washing through the scorched landscape of her soul. The fire did not vanish, but it receded, its roar diminishing to a sullen, angry glow. The serpent in her mind hissed and thrashed, but its coils seemed to lose their strength, its movements becoming sluggish. As if it were sinking into a deep, peaceful sea. The whispers of Orochimaru, the ghostly echoes of her trauma, began to fade, washed away by the silent, relentless current. The searing pain that had been her world dissolved, leaving behind a dull ache, and then, nothing. Silence. For the first time since she was a child, there was quiet in her soul. The relief was a physical thing. It was so total, so absolute, it was its own form of agony. A pressure she had carried for more than half her life was suddenly gone, and the sheer, vertiginous emptiness it left in its place was overwhelming. The dam of her resilience, the tough, wild, defiant persona she had built to survive the constant pain, finally broke. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye. Then another. She began to weep. Deep. Silent, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. She wasn't crying from pain or from fear. She was crying for the quiet. Naruto felt the shift. The seal's violent energy receded. Its will becoming dormant, pacified. It was not gone, but it was caged. Not in a prison of seals and suppression, but in a gentle, living matrix of his own chakra, a permanent coolant system woven into her very being. He held the connection for another minute, ensuring the equilibrium was stable, then slowly, carefully, he withdrew his presence. He stumbled back from the bed, his legs weak. A sheen of sweat on his brow. The mental focus required for such a delicate, prolonged procedure had been immense, more draining than any battle of brute force. He looked down at Anko. He black markings had receded completely, leaving only the original 3 tomo on her neck, now inert and faint, like an old tattoo. Her breathing was deep and even. She was asleep, her face relaxed. And peaceful for the first time he had ever seen, tear tracks still glistening on her cheeks. Tsunade and Jiraiya burst into the room, their faces etched with disbelief and awe. They saw the dormant seal, the steady vital signs. The peaceful patient. They saw the exhausted boy leaning against the wall for support. Tsunade rushed to Anko's side, her hands glowing as she ran a full diagnostic. Her eyes were wide. It's stable. The malignant chakra is completely inert. It's encased in a layer of his chakra, perfectly balanced. It's a perfect seal. Medically, spiritually, it's perfect. Kami, boy, what have you become? Naruto just shook his head, too tired to speak. Hours later, Anko awoke. The first thing she registered was not a sight or a sound, but an absence. The silence. The ever-present thrum of pain. The background noise of malevolent chakra that had been the soundtrack to her life for 12 years, was gone. The quiet was so pure, so complete, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever experienced. She turned her head. Naruto was asleep in a chair by her bed, his head slumped against his chest, his breathing soft. She watched him for a long, silent moment. The loudmouthed, orange-clad brat. The demon container the village had feared and scorned. The boy who had just walked into the private, inescapable hell she had lived in for more than a decade, and had not judged her, not feared her, but had simply healed her. He had brought peace to a place she thought was damned forever. His eyes fluttered open, the deep azure finding her own. He looked tired, but he gave her a small, gentle smile. Hey, you feeling better? Anko opened her mouth. She wanted to make a joke. She wanted to call him a brat, to put up her usual walls of bravado and sarcasm. But the words wouldn't come. The walls were gone, washed away by the cleansing tide. All that was left was a raw, aching, and profound gratitude. Yeah, she whispered, her voice thick. She swallowed, trying to find the right words. But they were inadequate. There were no words for what he had done. So she settled for the only ones that mattered. Thank you, Naruto. The weight behind them was the weight of a soul given a second chance. He had not just saved her life. He had given it back to her. And in that quiet, sterile room, Anko Midarashi, the untamed serpent of Konoha, swore a silent, unbreakable oath. This boy was not a demon. He was not a weapon. He was her anchor in the storm. And she would follow him into any hell he asked. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Priestess of the Forgotten Shrine. The quiet hum of Naruto's power had become the new normal in Konoha, a subtle, ambient pressure that the villagers were slowly growing accustomed to. But for Jiraiya, it was a constant, nagging puzzle. He sat in the cavernous, scroll-lined depths of the Hokage archives, the air thick with the scent of aging paper and preservation seals. Before him, ancient, brittle scrolls detailing the history of the Uzumaki clan were spread across a heavy oak table. He was searching for an answer to a question that defied all known chakra theory. Naruto's power was not a jutsu that could be learned, nor did it say to be a standard bloodline limit that followed predictable rules. It was something else, something older. His attempts to teach Naruto traditional fuinjutsu, the supposed birthright of the Uzumaki, had been met with bizarre results. Naruto couldn't grasp the intricate calligraphy, but he could instinctively manipulate the chakra ink, making it flow and form patterns of its own will. It was like trying to teach a river how to flow by showing it a map. The river already knew its own course. Naruto sat across from him, looking at the complex ceiling arrays with a placid frustration. I don't get it, pervy sage. I can feel the intent behind the seals, the way they're supposed to guide the chakra. But trying to write it down feels clumsy. It's like I'm trying to describe the taste of water to someone who's never had a drink. Jiraiya sighed, rubbing his temples. The boy's analogies were becoming as strange as his abilities. He unrolled another scroll, this one detailing the destruction of Uzushiogakure. It spoke of how the allied shinobi forces had laid siege to the island nation, but had been unable to breach its shores for months, held at bay by the legendary maelstroms of Uzu, a series of colossal, permanent whirlpools that were said to be a natural phenomenon amplified by Uzumaki fuinjutsu. A footnote, written in the spidery hand of a long-dead historian, caught his eye. It was a half-believed rumor. A piece of battlefield folklore. The whirlpools did not just protect the island, they seemed to be its very source of life. Legends among the Uzu spoke of a hidden sanctum. The Shio no Shinzo, the heart of the maelstrom, a place of power from which the clan's unnatural vitality and chakra prowess was said to flow. The heart of the maelstrom. The words resonated with a deep, instinctual significance. Naruto. Jiraiya said, his voice suddenly serious. I think I know where we have to go. To a place that might have the answers we're looking for. Your ancestral home. The land of whirlpools. The decision, once made, escalated quickly. In Tsunade's office, Jiraiya laid out his theory. Uzu no Kuni was the only place in the world that might hold the key to understanding, and perhaps controlling the divine power Naruto now wielded. It was a perilous journey. The island had been inaccessible for decades, its waters a death trap for any who approached. It's too dangerous, Tsunade argued. Though her protest lacked its usual force. She knew they were operating in the dark. What is more dangerous? A calm voice interjected. Harribel stood by the window, her arms crossed, her presence a silent, watchful pillar. Allowing his power to remain an enigma, or seeking its source. His abilities are the foundation upon which our new alliance is built. I will not have that foundation be a mystery. I will accompany him. Another, softer voice joined the conversation. As will I. Konan stepped forward from the shadows of the office. She had remained in Konoha as a tentative ambassador from the newly opened Omegakure, her presence a constant, quiet symbol of the monumental shift that had occurred. Her amethyst eyes were fixed on Naruto. I witnessed a power that brought light to a land that had forgotten the sun, she said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. I was taught that my friend, Nagato, was a god. But his power was born from pain, and it only created more. Your power, Naruto Uzumaki, is born from something else. I must understand the source of the light I saw. Tsunade looked at the assembled group. Her genin student, the Toad Sage, a dimension-hopping Arankar queen, and the S-class angel of Omegakure. It was the most unorthodox, and perhaps most powerful, diplomatic team in the history of the world. Fine, she sighed, a reluctant smile touching her lips. Go find your answers. And try not to start a war with the ocean. Their vessel was a sturdy, ocean-going ship, chartered from the land of tea. For days, they sailed across calm blue waters under a brilliant sun. The mood on the ship was one of quiet anticipation. Conan spent most of her time crafting intricate paper birds that would fly out over the waves before dissolving in the sea spray. As if testing the nature of this new, vast expanse of water she had never seen. Jiraiya told stories of his youth, his boisterous laughter a stark contrast to Harribel's stoic silence. Harribel, for her part, watched Naruto. She saw how he stood at the prow for hours, his eyes closed, his azure hair whipping in the wind. He wasn't just enjoying the sea breeze. She could feel it. He was communing with the ocean. His vast, calm chakra spreading out to touch the currents, to feel the life in the depths, to become one with the endless blue. As they entered the water's charty, D is belonging to the land of whirlpools, the world changed. The sky turned a slate gray. The sea, once placid, became a choppy, violent gray-green. The wind howled with a mournful, ancient voice. And then they saw them. The maelstroms of Uzu. It was a seascape lifted from a nightmare. As far as the eye could see, the ocean was a churning chaos of competing whirlpools. Some were 100 feet across, their funnels pulling down water with a terrifying, sucking roar. Others were massive, continent-sized gyres that spun with a slow, inexorable power that could tear a fleet of warships to splinters. It was not a barrier. It was a liquid apocalypse. The captain of their ship, a grizzled old sailor with a face like a sea-worn map, paled. This is as far as we go, he stammered, his hands trembling on the ship's wheel. That's the Devil's Grinder. No ship has ever passed it. None has ever returned. Jiraiya stared at the chaos, his expression grim. There are fuinjutsu amplifiers at work here, woven into the natural currents. It's even worse than the legends described. We may have to try a high-altitude aerial insertion. That won't be necessary, Naruto said. He walked to the prow of the ship, the howling wind doing nothing to disturb his centered stance. He looked out at the raging sea, at the impossible, interlocking gears of the maelstroms. He didn't shout. He didn't make a hand sign. He didn't even seem to gather chakra. He simply reached out, not with his hands, but with his very essence. He extended his consciousness, his calm, azure aura, and touched the raging heart of the storm. He did not command it to stop. He did not order it to heal. He simply offered it peace. He presented his own profound, internal stillness to the ocean's chaotic rage, an invitation to equilibrium. And the ocean, recognizing its master, accepted. The effect was gradual, majestic, and utterly awe-inspiring. The deafening roar of the whirlpools began to soften. The violent, churning funnels slowed their spin. The chaotic, intersecting currents smoothed out. It was not as if the maelstroms had vanished. Rather, they had been tamed. The sea was still moving, but now it moved with a unified, gentle purpose. A single, clear channel, half a mile wide, opened through the very heart of the Devil's Grinder. The water within it was as calm and flat as a millpond. On either side, the colossal whirlpools still spun. But they did so with a slow, respectful grace, like colossal, silent sentinels standing guard over the path. The captain fell to his knees, his eyes wide with religious terror. Jiraiya's jaw hung open. Conan watched, her hand over her heart, tears welling in her eyes at the sheer, breathtaking beauty of the act. Harribel stood beside Naruto, her expression unreadable behind her mask. But her spirit felt it. A display of power so absolute and so gentle it redefined the very meaning of the word, dominion. Captain, Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear over the now subsided wind. Our path is clear. The island of Uzu was a place of profound and tragic beauty. Mist clung to the ground, and the air was thick with the taste of salt and the phantom hum of immense, dormant power. The ruins of Uzu were colossal. Massive, crumbling towers, their architecture a symphony of spirals and intricate eddies, reached towards the gray sky. Every remaining surface, walls, flagstones, archways, was covered in complex fuinjutsu formulas, the carved lines still glowing with a faint, ghostly blue light, the echoes of a power that had once shaken the world. They were masters, Jiraiya whispered. His voice filled with awe as he ran a hand over a preservation seal that was still 90% intact after decades of neglect. Their skill was so far beyond the other villages. It's no wonder everyone feared them enough to unite against them. As they walked through the silent, empty streets, a strange feeling began to take hold of Naruto. It was a sense of homecoming. He felt a pull, a gentle but insistent tugging from the very core of his being, leading him away from the main city and towards the island's central cliffs. He followed it without question, the others trailing behind him. Respecting the invisible pilgrimage he was on, he stopped before a sheer cliff face, a wall of solid rock covered in a dense, interlocking web of the most powerful preservation and concealment seals Jiraiya had ever witnessed. To anyone else, it was an impassable dead end. To Naruto, it was a door waiting for its key. He reached out and placed his palm flat against the cold stone. The moment his chakra touched the array, the entire cliff face lit up. The ancient, dormant seals flared with a brilliant, azure light, recognizing the signature of their master. With a sound like 1,000 chiming bells, the intricate patterns of the fuinjutsu dissolved, and a section of the rock face shimmered and became translucent, revealing a dark opening within. The air that wafted out was ancient, pure, and pulsed with a power that made the hair on their arms stand up. They had found it. The heart of the maelstrom. The shrine within was perfectly preserved. It was a vast, natural cavern. The stone walls smooth and spiraling up to a single opening in the ceiling, through which a soft, misty light filtered down. The air was cool and still. In the center of the cavern was a wide, circular spring of water so pure and clear it seemed to be a pool of liquid light. The walls of the cavern were not bare stone. They were covered in a single, continuous, spiraling mural that depicted a story of staggering scale. And beside the spring, seated in meditation on a smooth, gray stone, was a woman. She had the vibrant, fiery red hair that was the most famous hallmark of the Uzumaki clan. It cascaded down her back, a stark, beautiful contrast to her simple, white priestess robes. When she opened her eyes to look at them, the group collectively gasped. Her eyes were the same deep, placid, and luminous azure as Naruto's. She looked no older than 20, yet her gaze held the serene, bottomless wisdom of ages. She smiled, a gentle, welcoming expression. "You have come," she said, her voice soft and melodic. Yet it filled the cavern as if she stood beside each of them. She looked directly at Naruto. "The maelstrom has returned to its heart. I have been waiting." Who are you?" Jiraiya asked. His voice hushed with reverence. "I am Shizuku Uzu," she replied, rising to her feet with a fluid grace. "The last oracle. The keeper of the spring. The guardian of the story." She gestured to the mural on the wall. "And the one tasked with helping the new vessel to remember." She led them to the edge of the spring. "You have questions," she said, her eyes on Naruto. "You feel the power, but you do not know its name. You wield the ocean, but you do not know its source. Your bloodline makes you a suitable host, Naruto Uzumaki, but what you carry is not a bloodline." She dipped a hand into the luminous water of the spring. "Behold the story." The water began to glow, the light intensifying. Images, vivid and real as life, began to form on the surface, rising into the air like three-dimensional projections. The first was of a chaotic, primordial world of fire and rock. In the dawn of time, before humanity, the world was shaped by the Shizen Shin, the nature gods, Shizuku's voice narrated. Great spirits of fire, earth, wind, and water. The most powerful and benevolent of these was the Sujin, the spirit of all water, of life, of balance, and of creation. The vision shifted. It showed the first humans, struggling and fearful. Then it showed a woman with fiery red hair, reaching out to a vast, oceanic being of pure azure light. The Uzumaki clan, blessed with I am. Men's vitality and a natural affinity for life energy forged a pact with the Great Spirit. Not to control it, but to partner with it. Once every millennium, when the world falls too far into imbalance, the Sujin chooses a worthy soul from the Uzumaki line to act as its vessel, a mortal anchor to help guide the world back to harmony. The images swirled, showing flashes of other figures across the ages, all with the same azure eyes. A man standing in a vast desert, summoning a life-giving rain that turned the sand to a green paradise. A woman with a determined face, standing on a shore and raising a new, fertile continent from the ocean floor. A warrior clad in water armor, battling a colossal demon of pure black fire that had torn its way into their world from another dimension. Then, the vision darkened. It showed a vessel, his face contorted with grief after the loss of his family, losing control. The oceans of the world began to rise, threatening to drown everything in his sorrow. It was a terrifying cautionary tale. The power is a partnership, Shizuku said, her tone somber. It resonates with the vessel's heart. It can be a tool of infinite creation, or, if the heart is lost to despair, a flood of absolute destruction. The visions faded, and the spring returned to its calm, luminous state. Harribel and Conan were staring, their expressions a mixture of awe and profound understanding. Harribel finally understood the nature of the man she had allied with. He was not just a king. He was a divine entity, a living force of nature. It validated her every instinct. Conan was visibly trembling. She had followed a man who claimed to be a god of pain. Now she stood in the presence of a true vessel of a god of life. The contrast was a revelation that sealed the final cracks in her old ideology. Shizuku turned her full attention to Naruto, her azure eyes locking with his. Your awakening on the bridge was not an accident. It was a response. The world's hatred, its endless cycles of war and death, had reached a tipping point. The Sujin chose you, Naruto Uzumaki, in that moment of ultimate despair and selfless love for your friends, to be the new balancing agent. She stepped closer, her expression one of immense gravity and expectation. Your predecessors saved this world, and they have failed it. The path you now walk is yours and yours alone. The burden you carry is not that of a Jinchuriki, but of a world's hope. The world is out of balance. It falls to you to restore it. Her voice softened, but her eyes held a new light, that of a teacher to her student, a guide to her purpose. And I am here to help you learn how. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Convergence of Queens. The island rose from the churning, jade-green sea of the land of water like a clenched fist. It was a place of isolation, deliberately chosen for its seclusion and neutrality. At its highest point, a single, elegant pagoda of dark, sea-worn wood stood defiant against the sky, its T-ired roofs like the scales of some ancient reptile. The air was thick with the coming of a storm. Heavy, bruised clouds gathered on the horizon, and the wind carried the scent of salt, ozone, and tension so palpable it was almost a taste. This was the stage Naruto had set for the birth of a new world. The first to arrive did so without a sound. Reality tore open in a silent, black rift, and Tier Harribel stepped through the garganta onto the cliffside, the portal snapping shut behind her. She stood for a moment, a stark figure of white against the gray sky, her jade eyes surveying the island with the cool, appraising gaze of a monarch assessing new territory. The next came on the wind. A swirl of 1,000 paper butterflies, impossibly white against the darkening clouds, coalesced on the pagoda's highest roof, reforming into the serene, melancholic figure of Conan. She looked down at the churning sea, her expression unreadable, a dove seeking purchase in a tempest. The third arrived, with the graceless pragmatism of her nation. A sturdy, functional boat from the land of earth cut through the choppy waves, docking at the island's small, hidden cove. Kuretsuchi leapt onto the shore before the ramp was even down, her feet landing solidly on the rocky beach. She glared up at the pagoda, her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiant skepticism. She was here not as a believer, but as a scout in the lion's den. The final arrivals came with their host. Naruto walked up the winding stone path from the cove, flanked by two disparate guardians. On his right, Shizuku Uzu, her vibrant red hair a torch against the gloom, moved with a serene, flowing grace, her azure eyes calm as the eye of the storm. On his left, Anko Mitarashi prowled more than walked, her head on a constant swivel, her eyes missing nothing. a caged predator tasked with guarding the one who had tamed her. They converged in the pagoda's central chamber, a wide, circular room with paper shoji screens that rattled in the rising wind. A single, low table sat in the center. The atmosphere was immediately charged, a volatile mixture of power, pride, and deep-seated suspicion. So this is it, Kuretsuchi began, her voice a sharp, abrasive tool designed to probe for weakness. She didn't bother with pleasantries. The Great Council, a Jinchuriki, a Sanin's ghost, a soul-eating monster, and a paper-wielding missing nin. Forgive me if I'm not impressed. What is this, Uzumaki? A collection of freaks to intimidate the rest of the world. Harribel, who had been observing the room in silence, turned her cold gaze upon the Iowa princess. Your village mistakes loud noises for strength. It is a tedious trait. You are here because your vaunted might of stone was dismantled without effort. Remember your place. And what is your place, Arankar? Kuretsuchi shot back, her hand drifting towards the kunai pouch on her thigh. A demon from another world, trying to play politics with humans. I am a queen, Harribel stated, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. And I do not play. I rule. Peace, a soft voice interjected. Shizuku was moving between them, placing delicate ceramic cups on table as if the immense killing intent in the room were nothing more than a mild draft. She poured steaming green tea into each. Disparate currents must join to form a great river. To rage against one another is to remain a shallow flood, destructive but without purpose. Anko, who had been leaning against a pillar, snorted. Great. The brat's got a pet philosopher. Listen, Rockhead, you're here because Naruto invited you. That's the only reason my snakes aren't currently checking to see what you had for breakfast. So shut your mouth, drink your tea, and listen to the man who could turn your entire village into a mud puddle. The tension thickened, a spark away from exploding into open violence. Konan, who had remained silent, finally spoke, her voice calm and measured, directed at Kuretsuchi. Iwa and AIM have a long history of conflict. Your village's mercenaries fought in our civil war, prolonging the bloodshed for years. Yet I am here, because I have seen a power that heals rather than breaks. Perhaps you should try observing before you pass judgment. Naruto had let the initial confrontation play out, watching, gauging the deep-seated friction he needed to overcome. Now, he stepped into the center of the room. And his calm, quiet presence was enough to command their attention. Thank you all for coming, he began, his azure eyes sweeping over each of them. You're right, Kuretsuchi. We are a strange collection. We are enemies, rivals, and strangers. We are the products of a world that has taught us to fear and hate one another. That is the world our ancestors built. And it is dying. He looked from Konan's haunted eyes to Harribel's stoic mask, from Anko's fierce loyalty to Kuretsuchi's defiant pride. A new age is coming. An age of chaos. There are enemies in the shadows, enemies between worlds. Who are stronger than any one of our nations? The old ways, the cage summits, the treaties written in blood and broken in secret, they won't be enough to protect our people. I called you here because each of you represents a new way. A new form of strength. I am not trying to build an army to conquer the world. I am asking you to help me build a shield to protect it. A council based not on borders or old loyalties, but on a shared will to defend our homes. Together. Kuretsuchi stared at him, her expression a mixture of scorn and grudging consideration. A shield. Or a fist, with you as its master. Words are easy, Uzumaki. What makes you think? She was cut off by the sound of shattering reality. The attack was not subtle. It was a statement of overwhelming force. The shoji screens on all sides of the pagoda exploded inward as 24 shinobi in blank, white masks and black bodysuits flickered into the room, kunai flashing. Simultaneously, the sky outside the pagoda tore open. 3 separate gargantas ripped through the gathering storm clouds, and from them emerged a trio of powerful Arankar, their spiritual pressure a wave of jagged, hungry malice that crashed over the island. The world dissolved into chaos. From the pagoda's roof, a new figure dropped down, landing silently amidst the shattered screens. He was a man of average height and build. His face plain and forgettable save for his eyes. They were the eyes of a corpse. Flat, dull, and utterly devoid of emotion. He wore the standard Konoha Jonin flak jacket, but there was no headband, no sign of allegiance. It was the chillingly blank uniform of a root operative. Naruto Uzumaki, the man said, his voice as lifeless as his eyes. The failed vessel. Lord Danzo was wrong to see you as a tool to be controlled. Such divine power cannot be leashed. It must be transplanted. As he spoke, a hulking, panther-like Arankar with bone-white armor and burning red eyes landed on the beach below with the force of a meteor. Cracking the very bedrock, he let out a deafening roar that shook the island. Tier Harribel. The Arankar bellowed, his voice raw with hatred. Traitor. You lie yourself with the filth of the living world. You have betrayed the way of the hollow. I, Cazador, will feast on your soul as punishment for your heresy. It was a perfectly coordinated, two-pronged assault. Designed to divide and conquer. The shinobi in the room, all clearly elite root-trained assassins, moved as one, targeting the council members. But they were attacking queens and monsters. Insolent insects. Harribel hissed, her Zanpakuto already in her hand. A single, horizontal slash of her blade unleashed a wave of golden energy, a Gran Rey Cero, that vaporized the half-dozen assassins charging her. Conan exploded into a storm of paper, her body becoming 1,000 razor-sharp shuriken that sliced through the air, forcing her attackers back. Kuretsuchi stomped her foot, and a wall of solid rock erupted from the floor, shielding her from a volley of poison Senbon. Enko was a blur of motion, her snake hands lashing out, her own kunai a silver flicker in the dim light. Chaos reigned. But through it all, Naruto was an island of perfect calm. His aqua sensing gave him a complete, three-dimensional view of the entire island, every combatant, every attack vector. He was the only one who could see the whole board. His voice cut through the din of battle, sharp and commanding, imbued with an authority that none of them thought to question. Conan, you have the sky. Provide reconnaissance and cover. Kuretsuchi, the ground is yours. Their main force is coming from the beach, create a choke point at the base of the path. Harribel, the big cat is yours. He's trying to draw you away, don't let him. Enko, their commander on the roof is mine. You take down his personal guard. Clear me a path. Shizuku, the pagoda is our fortress. Seal it. The women, who had been seconds away from tearing each other apart, reacted instantly. It was a symphony of instinct and power. Conan's paper form dissolved and reformed outside, soaring high into the storm clouds, her vantage point giving her a complete view of the battlefield. 30 more shinobi approaching from the west. The Arankar are engaging Harribel. Her voice echoed in their minds via a paper receiver she had attached to them. Down on the beach, Kuretsuchi, her earlier animosity forgotten in the heat of battle, let out a fierce grin. Now this is more like it. She slammed her palms on the ground. Earth style. Earthen golem. The rock and mud of the cliffs rose up, forming a massive, hulking figure that met the charging shinobi head-on. She then flashed through another set of seals. Lava release. Scorching stream. A river of molten rock poured down the main path to the pagoda, creating an impassable, fiery moat that funneled the attackers into her golem's waiting fists. Harribel met Cazador's charge on the cliffs. Their battle was a cataclysm. Golden Ceros met Crimson Ones, exploding with enough force to shear off sections of the island. Their blades clashed with a sound like ringing bells, EAC. Impact sending shockwaves through the air. Cazador was a berserker, all savage force and rage, but Harribel was a queen, her movements precise, deadly, and efficient. Within the pagoda, Enko moved like a vengeful spirit. The root commander had been flanked by 4 of his most elite guards. Enko engaged them all at once, a whirlwind of snakes, kunai, and brutal close-quarters combat. A guard lunged, and her hidden shadow snake hands shot from her sleeve, biting into his neck. She ducked under a sword slash from another, driving her own kunai into his kidney. She was in her element, a predator unleashed. A loyal serpent guarding her master. As Enko cleared the field, Shizuku became the anchor. She stood in the center of the ravaged room, her hands pressed against the floorboards. Immense, glowing blue fuinjutsu formulas. Complex and ancient as the sea itself, spread from her palms, racing across the floors, up the walls, and over the roof. Uzumaki sealing art. Fortress of the Silent Tide. A semi-transparent, shimmering blue dome of pure chakra erupted from the pagoda, enclosing it completely. Stray jutsu and energy blasts struck the barrier and dissolved with a quiet hiss, their energy harmlessly dispersed. This left Naruto and the root commander, Kageyama. Your friends are impressive, Kageyama said, his voice flat as he drew a ninjutsu. But they are flawed. Emotional. They fight for sentiment. I fight for purpose. Lord Danzo's purpose. A unified world under the absolute, unblinking eye of a single, hidden power. Your power will achieve that. He blurred forward, his speed rivaling the yellow flash. He was a master of Root's emotionless, pragmatic style of combat. His blade was aimed at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't even move his feet. A wall of water, dense as steel, rose from the floorboards. Intercepting the blade, Kageyama leapt back as Naruto formed a Rasengan, not of wind, but of pure, swirling water. Kageyama countered with a wind-style gale, and the two attacks met in an explosion of mist that filled the room. But the mist was Naruto's world. He saw Kageyama perfectly, a warm signature in the cold, wet air. He appeared behind him, a water clone distracting him from the front. But Kageyama was too well trained. He spun, his blade lashing out, dispersing the clone. The symphony of battle outside reached its crescendo. Konan's paper bombs, guided by her aerial view, rained down on the shinobi trying to scale the cliffs. Kuretsuchi's golem, though battered, held the line. And Harribel, seeing an opening as Cazador was momentarily distracted by an earthen spike from Kuretsuchi that grazed his leg, unleashed her ultimate attack. A massive, shark-shaped missile of water, a proyectile azul, struck the Arankar dead on, sending him plummeting into the sea below in a colossal explosion. Seeing their leaders faltering, the tide of the battle turned. Inside the pagoda, Naruto decided to end it. He had seen enough. Kageyama was skilled, but he was a shinobi fighting a force of nature. Naruto raised his hand. The mist in the room, the tea spilled on the floor, the very water in the wooden pillars of the pagoda, all answered his call. Water erupted from every surface. Not as an attack, but as a prison. It formed dozens of powerful, swirling tendrils that wrapped around Kageyama's limbs, his torso, his neck. He struggled, but the water was impossibly strong. Finally, it coalesced into a perfect, transparent sphere of hyper-dense water around him, lifting him into the air. He was trapped, unable to move, unable to mold chakra, a fly caught in a droplet of amber. The remaining assassins and Arankar, their commanders defeated, broke and fled, vanishing into the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the wind, the rain, and the ragged, heavy breathing of the victorious defenders. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon finally broke over the island, its cool rain washing the blood and dust from the tattered battlefield. They stood together on the cliffside. The 5 women and the 1 man at the center of it all. Battered, bruised, but united. Kuretsuchi looked at Konan, whose paper birds had warned her of a flanking attack that would have killed her. Harribel gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to Kuretsuchi, whose lava had prevented the shinobi from overwhelming her. Enko stood beside Shizuku, a silent, deadly guard foe. The serene priestess who had shielded them all. The animosity, the rivalry, the suspicion, it had all been burned away in the fires of battle and reforged into a grudging, undeniable, and deeply earned respect. Naruto looked at his council, his shield. The storm raged around them, but here, on this small island, a new center of power had formed, forged in a crucible of their own making. He turned to Kuretsuchi, the rain plastering his azure hair to his forehead. His eyes were calm, but they held the power of the ocean behind them. Kageyama wanted to build a new order based on fear and control, he said. His voice carrying over the storm. We have a chance to build one based on trust and strength. The real storm is still coming. He held her gaze. Are you with us? Kuretsuchi looked from Naruto's honest face to the other women. The monster, the ghost, the priestess, the serpent. Her allies. Her team. The pragmatist in her saw the undeniable truth. The warrior in her respected their strength. The leader in her saw the future. She let out a long, weary breath and a sharp, fierce grin spread across her face. Hell of a way to ask, she said. But yeah, I'm in. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. Vows before the endless blue. The storm had broken. In its wake, it left a world washed clean, the air crisp and cool, smelling of rain-soaked earth and the distant, briny tang of the sea. On the summit island, The immediate aftermath of the battle was a scene of quiet, focused activity. The newly forged unit moved with an unspoken synergy, their earlier friction scoured away by the heat of shared combat. Conan's paper birds became makeshift bandages and splints for their minor wounds. Kuretsuchi, with a grudging efficiency, used her earth style to clear the rubble and contain the bound ant. Unconscious form of Kageyama in a cage of solid stone. Anko, her senses still sharp, patrolled the perimeter, a silent, deadly shadow ensuring no threat remained. Harribel stood on the cliff's edge, a stoic sentinel watching the churning sea, while Shizuku moved among them, her presence a calming balm, her quiet words of guidance helping to center their frayed nerves. Naruto watched them, a profound realization settling in his heart. The victory was not the end. It was a proof of concept. It was the chaotic, violent birth of something new. But a battlefield pact, forged in blood and desperation, was not enough. An alliance born of necessity would fracture under the weight of politics and old hatreds. What he had gathered here, on this storm-lashed rock, needed to be something more. It needed a foundation. It needed a heart. Our work here is done, he announced, his voice carrying in the clean air. The women turned to him. But our journey is not. This was a test, and we passed. Now, it is time to build. He looked towards the west, in the direction of his ancestral home. I am returning to Uzu no Kuni. To the shrine. I invite you all to come with me. He met their gazes, one by one. That is where our new world will truly begin. There were no arguments. There were no questions. There were only nods of assent. They had fought together. Now, they would build together. The journey back was a quiet, contemplative affair, the silence between them no longer one of tension, but of shared understanding. They arrived at the heart of the maelstrom as the sun began its slow, majestic descent towards the horizon. The shrine felt different. During his previous visit, Naruto had unconsciously poured his own nascent, overflowing life energy into the ancient place. Now, it felt awake. The glowing fuinjutsu on the walls pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. The crystals in the ceiling cast a brighter, warmer light. The central spring gurgled with a vibrant, musical energy. The setting sun cast a single, brilliant shaft of golden red light through the cavern's ceiling, illuminating the very center of the chamber. It was a sacred, peaceful light, the perfect stage for the vows that were about to be made. This was a place of beginnings. The first conversation was the most difficult, the one that required a bridge to be built over the deepest chasm of history. Naruto found Kuretsuchi at the entrance to the shrine, her arms crossed as she stared out at the sprawling, silent ruins of Uzushiogakure. The setting sun painted the crumbling towers in shades of amber and rose, lending them a tragic, haunting beauty. Your people were powerful, she said without turning, her voice stripped of its usual abrasive edge. It was a simple statement of fact from a woman who respected power above all else. To have built all this. To have held off the entire world for as long as they did. They were. Naruto agreed, standing beside her. They were powerful, and proud, and stubborn. And in the end, their pride and their isolation got them killed. They saw other villages as rivals to be bested, not partners to be trusted. He turned to her, his azure eyes serious. It's a mistake I don't intend to repeat. He saw the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She knew he was talking about Iwa. My grandfather sees your father every time he looks at Konoha, she admitted. Her gaze still fixed on the ruins. The Third War left deep scars. To him, an alliance with the Leaf is tantamount to surrender. This isn't about the Leaf. Or Iwa, Naruto countered gently. This is about the future. Your grandfather is a man of stone, Kuretsuchi. He understands strength, and he understands resources. He spoke her language. Not of peace and love, but of pragmatism and power. My power can end any drought in the land of Earth forever. It can guarantee a food supply that would make your nation the most prosperous on the continent. In return, Iwa's industrial strength, your mines, your blacksmiths, can provide the materials to rebuild nations like AIM, to construct the infrastructure of a new world. We can be stronger, more prosperous, and safer together than we ever were apart. That is not surrender. That is victory. He produced a thick, formal scroll from within his jacket and offered it to her. This is a draft, a treaty of mutual defense, economic partnership, and technological exchange. Not between Konoha and Iwa. Between my council and your village. Take it to your Tsuchikage. Tell him what you saw. Tell him the son of his old enemy is offering him not a fist, but an open hand. Kuretsuchi looked from the scroll to his honest, unwavering gaze. He wasn't trying to trick her or manipulate her. He was treating her as an equal, a diplomat, a future leader. He was respecting her village's pride by appealing to its strength. She took the scroll, her fingers brushing his. Her expression was grim, but it was the grimness of resolve, not of anger. He's a stubborn old fossil, she said, a hint of her old fire returning. But he's not a fool. He'll listen. She paused. For what you did back there, coordinating us, you fight well for a diplomat. You fight well for a politician. He replied with a small smile. The bridge had been built. He found Conan standing before the great, spiraling mural that depicted the history of the Sujin's vessels. She traced a single, delicate finger over an image of a past vessel creating a landmass from the sea. The golden light of the setting sun made her blue hair shine like a halo. All my life, she whispered. Not turning as he approached, I believed Nagato was a god. I watched him command the rain, pass judgment on the world. His pain was so immense, I thought it had to be divine. She finally looked at him. Her amethyst eyes holding a universe of sorrow and dawning hope. But his power only ever brought more rain. More tears. Your power brought the sun. Nagato wanted to save the world by forcing it to its knees. Naruto said softly. He thought that if he could make everyone feel his pain, they would understand each other. But you can't build a future on shared pain. You can only build it on shared hope. He stood beside her, his gaze on the mural. You have a chance to give your people that hope, Conan. A megacure is a testament to your friend's pain. You can help it become a testament to his dream. The one he had before the world broke him. He turned to her, his expression earnest. I want to help. My power is not just for fighting. It's for building. We can help. You construct new aqueducts for clean water, irrigation for rooftop farms. We can bring in engineers from Konoha, materials from Iwa if they agree. We can turn your steel cage into a hanging garden. He gave her a gentle, encouraging smile. You were your city's angel of sorrow. Now, you can be its angel of hope. Conan stared at him, her lips trembling. He wasn't just offering aid. He was offering her a new purpose. A new path forward that honored the memory of her friends not by repeating their mistakes, but by fulfilling their original, untainted dream of a peaceful home. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time. They were not tears of grief. Thank you, Naruto, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of a nation's future. She bowed her head, a silent pledge of her unwavering allegiance to the boy who had shown her the sun. Anko was where he expected to find her, in the shadows. She was perched on a high ledge in a darker corner of the shrine, her senses on high alert, ever the guardian. The battle had awakened something in her, a fierce, focused energy that had replaced her old, chaotic wildness. You're getting predictable, brat, she said as he approached, though there was no bite in her words. First the rock princess, then the paper angel. Saving the snake for last. I needed to talk to you somewhere quiet, he said, hopping up onto the ledge beside her. He looked out at the shrine below, where the others were gathered. The battle today. You were incredible, Anko. She shrugged, a flicker of surprised pleasure in her eyes. Just doing my job. Keeping the snakes in the grass away from you. Quote. It's more than that, he said, turning to her. I have this power that can sense everything. But it's a weakness, too. My attention is on the whole ocean. I need someone focused on the sharks that swim in it. Someone who can see the threats I don't. Someone who understands the darkness because they've lived in it. He met her gaze, his expression serious. My role in the world is changing. I'm not just a Konoha shinobi anymore. And that means I will have enemies you can't even imagine. I need someone watching my back who I can trust with my life. One who knows what it's like to have a monster inside them, and isn't afraid to use its fangs. He held out his hand. I'm creating a personal guard. A new unit, responsible only to me, that will act as my shield and my sword. The Shio no Kiba, the fangs of the maelstrom. I want you to be its commander. Anko stared at him, her jaw slack. A commander. Her own unit. A position of absolute trust and authority. For years, she had been a pariah, A tool, a dangerous but useful weapon kept on a short leash. No one had ever trusted her with anything more than AC rank interrogation. Now, he was trusting her with his life. He was giving her not just a purpose, but a place. A home at the very center of his new world. Her tough exterior crumbled. Her eyes glistened. "You damn brat," she choked out, Owly wiping at her eye with the back of her hand. "You do this on purpose, don't you? All this noble, trusting crap." She looked at his outstretched hand and slapped it, but her grip was firm, a binding oath. "Fine. I'll do it. But if any of those political types you're collecting try anything funny, I'm feeding them to my snakes. And I'm not asking permission first." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Naruto said with a genuine, warm smile. He found Shizuku by the central spring, its luminous waters swirling with latent power. She was humming a soft, ancient melody, her fingers trailing in the water. She looked up as he approached, her azure eyes holding a serene welcome. "The currents are settling," she said, her voice like the chiming of a bell. "The river has found its course." Naruto sat beside her, looking into the clear depths of the spring. "I can feel the power, Shizuku. I can command it. But I don't understand it. The visions you showed me, the responsibility, it's overwhelming." He looked at her, his expression vulnerable. "I can part the sea, but I don't have the wisdom of 1,000 years. I'm just a boy who grew up alone in a small apartment. How am I supposed to be a balancing agent for the entire world?" He sighed, the weight of his destiny settling on his shoulders. "I need a guide, a conscience, someone to show me the history in this spring and remind me of the balance when my own heart is tempted to just wash all the world's problems away in a great flood." He bowed his head to her, a gesture of profound respect. "I ask you to be my chief advisor. My oracle. The spiritual heart of this council. Please, teach me." Shizuku placed a gentle hand on his bowed head. Her smile was ancient and kind. "It is the purpose for which I have waited, Naruto Uzumaki. To be the memory for the Maelstrom's new heart. I will guide you." The final conversation was held at the highest point of the island, an open precipice outside the shrine that overlooked the vast, endless sea. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the world was bathed in the deep, velvet blues and purples of twilight. Countless stars were beginning to appear in the clear sky, their reeful seasons shimmering on the calm surface of the water. It was a vista of infinite, tranquil blue. Harribel stood there alone, her back to him, her white coat a stark contrast to the deepening night. She had removed the bone fragment of her mask, leaving it at the shrine. Her full face, proud and beautiful, was visible, her expression contemplative as she gazed at the sea. Naruto came to stand beside her. For a long time, they were silent. Two sovereigns watching over their shared domain of water. "You have built your council," Harribel said at last, her voice a low murmur on the quiet air. "A politician, an angel, a serpent, and an oracle. A powerful foundation. A foundation needs a cornerstone," Naruto replied, turning to her. "When I was a child, I dreamed of being Hokage. I thought it meant being the strongest. Being acknowledged by everyone. I was wrong. True leadership isn't about standing on top of everyone else. It's about building a home strong enough to protect them all." He looked from her strong, regal profile to the endless expanse of the ocean. "You are a queen without a stable kingdom, forced to fight for scraps in a dying world. I am a king with a power I am just learning how to rule. With a kingdom I have yet to build. You came to my world seeking an oasis, a source of power to protect your people. In you, I found a source of strength, of unwavering resolve. A Fei, low ruler who understands the burden of sacrifice." He took her hand. Her skin was warm. "An alliance can be broken by politics. A treaty can be rewritten by fear. But a family endures. House with two pillars is stronger than one." He met her jade green eyes, his own azure gaze filled with a sincerity and purpose that was absolute. "I am not asking you to be just an ally, Tier Harribel. I am asking you to build this new world with me. Stand by my side. Rule with me." He took a breath, his voice steady and clear in the twilight. "Be my wife." Harribel stared at him, her regal composure momentarily shaken. She had come here expecting a pact of power, a military alliance. She had not expected this. She looked at his face, at the boy who held the power of a god but spoke with the Heart of a king who would sooner build a garden than conquer a wasteland. She thought of the lonely, predatory existence in Hueco Mundo, the endless cycle of death. And she looked at him, the living embodiment of the oasis she had sought. A small, slow, and genuine smile touched her lips. A king who offers a throne, not chains, she said softly. You truly are from another world, Naruto Uzumaki. She squeezed his hand. Her decision made, her vow as strong and deep as the ocean before them. Yes, I will. When they returned to the central chamber, the others were waiting. The atmosphere was no longer one of tension or curiosity, but of quiet, purposeful unity. Naruto stood before them, Harribel at his side, their hands still linked. He looked at each of his new comrades, the pillars of his new world. There is one last thing, he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority in the sacred space. So that there are no ambiguities, no misunderstandings. Harribel has agreed to be my wife. She will be the queen of the new house we build together. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle, before his gaze swept over the others, filled with an equal measure of respect and admiration. But a house is more than its rulers. It is its foundation. And you are that foundation. Konan, our diplomat, whose compassion will build bridges between nations. Kuretsuchi, our general, whose pragmatism will keep us strong. Enko, our shield, whose loyalty will keep us safe. And Shizuku, our spirit, whose wisdom will keep us true. He looked at the incredible, powerful, and disparate women gathered before him. We are not a harem. We are a council. We are a family. The first rays of the new dawn pierced the opening in the cavern ceiling, bathing them all in a soft, golden light. The vows had been made. The foundation was set. Before the endless blue, a new world had been born. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Azure Dawn. The island of Uzu no Kuni was alive. Where once there had been NLY misty silence and the ghosts of a fallen people, there now stood a nascent capital, a testament to a power that did not conquer, but created. In the weeks following the battle on the summit island, Naruto, with the guidance of Shizuku and the surprising, gruffly efficient aid of a team of Iwagakure engineers loaned by a pragmatic Kuretsuchi, had worked a miracle. He had not rebuilt the entire city. Instead, he had focused on the heart of the island, raising the Grand Central District from its ruins. The architecture was a breathtaking fusion of old and new. The iconic, spiraling towers of the Uzumaki were restored. Their ancient fuinjutsu arrays now glowing with a vibrant, healthy blue light. Between them stood new structures of clean white stone and dark, polished wood, their designs practical and elegant. A subtle nod to Iwa's unyielding strength. It was a city built on the memory of the past, but with its eyes fixed firmly on the future. At the island's highest point, overlooking the now calm and brilliant blue sea, stood the centerpiece of this new beginning, a grand, open-air pavilion. Its floor was of polished white marble, inlaid with a colossal Uzumaki spiral in deep azure stone. The roof, supported by massive, unadorned wooden pillars, was a masterpiece of acoustics, designed to carry a single voice to 1,000 ears. There were no walls, only an unimpeded, panoramic view of the ocean, the sky, and the dawn of a new age. Today, the pavilion was filled. Guests from across the elemental nations and beyond had come, their presence a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, hope, and awe. They were a motley, impossible assembly. Shinobi from Suna, led by a stoic, watchful Gaara, stood not far from a delegation of AIM shinobi, who still looked up at the open, sunlit sky with a sense of childlike wonder. A small, heavily guarded group from Kiri, sent by the reformist Mizukage Terumi, observed the proceedings with cautious optimism. Even a pair of observers from the Land of Iron, silent and impassive in their samurai armor, stood sentinel, bearing witness to the shift in the world's balance. This was not merely a wedding. It was a coronation. Jiraiya stood near one of the great pillars. A fine ceramic flask of premium sake in his hand, though he had yet to take a drink. His eyes, usually filled with mischievous mirth, were glassy with unshed tears. He watched the impossible gathering. A scene he couldn't have written in his wildest fantasies. He saw his student, the fourth Hokage, and his brilliant, fiery wife, Kushina, in every line of Naruto's posture. He remembered the lonely, ostracized child, painting the Hokage monument for attention, defiantly screaming his dream to a world that despised him. And he looked at the man he had become, a leader who had gathered not just allies, but former enemies, and was now binding them together not with force, but with a shared vision. Minato had wanted to bring peace to the world. Naruto was not just bringing peace. He was building a new world entirely. Jiraiya finally took a long, slow drink from his flask, the burn of the sake a welcome anchor against the overwhelming tide of his pride. His work was done. The prophecy of the great Toad Sage had come to pass, but in a way more grand and strange than he could ever have imagined. Not far away, Kuretsuchi stood with her father, Kitsuchi, and a small, elite Iowa delegation. She wore formal, but practical, Iowa robes, her expression a carefully constructed mask of cynical detachment. "It's a bit gaudy, don't you think?" she remarked to her father, gesturing with her chin at a flowing banner of deep blue silk. "All this talk of hope and new dawns. It's just politics with prettier decorations." Kitsuchi, however, was not looking at the decorations. He was looking at the silent, imposing figures of Harribel's Fracken. He was looking at Gaara, the Cage, speaking in low, serious tones with Conan. He was looking at the sheer, consolidated power gathered in one place. "This is the most important political event of our lifetime, daughter," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The Tsuchikage's decision to send us, to accept the treaty in principle, it was the only logical move. To stand against this," he swept a hand across the pavilion, "would be to choose extinction." Kuretsuchi fell silent, her gaze following his. He was right. Her pragmatism, the core of her being, saw the undeniable truth. This was not a party. It was the founding of a new superpower, one that Iwagakure was now, however grudgingly, a part of. Across the pavilion, Harribel's Trace Bastias stood apart. An island of predatory grace and coiled tension. "I still don't understand the point of all this pageantry," Apache grumbled, her arms crossed. "If two people decide to be a unit, they fight together. That should be enough. It is a human custom, you brute," Cyan Sung Sun said, her voice a silken hiss from behind her sleeve. "They require these elaborate rituals to signify shifts in their social hierarchies. It is quaint. It's more than that," Francesca Mila Rose said, her eyes fixed on the entrance through which Harribel would soon appear. Her voice was uncharacteristically soft. "Look at them. All of them. They came here for him. But they will leave respecting her. This solidifies her position not just as our queen, but as the queen of this entire world. She is no longer alone in her duty." Apache and Sung Sun fell silent, contemplating her words. Beneath all their bickering was a fierce, unwavering devotion. Their queen, who had carried the burden of protecting them all by herself for so long, had found a partner whose power mirrored his respect for her. Their future, and the future of all Arankar who followed her, had never been more secure. Anko was not in the pavilion. She was on its roof, and on the cliffs, and in the trees. Or rather, her fangs of the maelstrom were. She herself stood in the shadows of the highest tier of the pagoda. Her senses stretched to their limit, a living nexus of the security detail. She wore a new uniform. A form-fitting, dark azure bodysuit with silver guards, the symbol of the maelstrom, a spiraling wave, emblazoned on her shoulder. She was all business, her eyes scanning the crowd, the sea, the sky. But for the first time in her adult life, her vigilance was not born of paranoia or fear. It was born of purpose. She was a shield. She was the fang that guarded the heart of this new world. And in that duty, she had found a peace that was more profound than any healing. The ceremony began as the sun touched the horizon, bathing the world in a light of liquid gold. Shizuku Uzu stood before the central spring, her red hair a fiery banner, her azure eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 tides. A hush fell over the crowd as the couple made their entrance. Naruto wore formal robes of a deep, oceanic blue, the Uzumaki spiral intricately embroidered in silver thread across the back. He wore no headband. He needed no symbol of allegiance to a single village, for he now belonged to the world. Beside him, Tier Harribel was a vision of breathtaking, dangerous beauty. She wore a flowing, sleeveless gown of pristine white, reminiscent of her original Arankar uniform but softer, more elegant. The high collar that had once been part of her mask now framed her face, and her golden hair was adorned with a simple, elegant pin of polished bone. At her hip, her Zanpakuto, Tiburon, rested, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of the power she brought to this union. They came to a stop before Shizuku, a king of life and a queen of the wastes, meeting on the common ground of their shared purpose. We gather today not to bind two people, but to witness the joining of two worlds. Shizuku's voice rang out, calm and clear. We stand between the endless, shifting sea, and the memory of the still, patient desert. We witness the union of that which flows, and that which endures. Of life, and of stillness. A new balance is found. She looked to them, and the vows began. First, the ritual of the shinobi. Enko appeared, presenting a single, ornate kunai on a silk pillow. Naruto took it, and without hesitation, drew a clean, shallow line across his palm. He offered it to Harribel, who took it and did the same. They then clasped their hands, mingling their blood and their immense energies, a vibrant blue chakra and a regal golden ryutsu swirling together. I am the tide that will guard your shores, Naruto vowed, his voice steady. The current that will carry your burdens. I offer you my strength. I offer you my shield. I am the blade that will answer your call, Harribel responded, her voice a clear, resonant alto. The resolve that will steady your hand. I offer you my power. I offer you my sword. They released their hands, the wounds already closing, the mingling of their essence a permanent, unbreakable seal. Then came the vow of the Arankar. Harribel drew Tiburon, its massive form humming with power in the twilight. She held it before her, the blade pointing to the sky. Naruto stepped forward and placed his palm flat against the cold, spiritual steel. Harribel's jade eyes locked with his. Mi poder es tu poder, she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen. My power is your power. Mi sacrificio es tu sacrificio. My sacrifice is your sacrifice. Juntos, reuniremos. Together, we will reign. As she spoke the final word, a brilliant flare of golden ryutsu erupted from the blade, enveloping them both in a harmless, beautiful corona of light. It was a vow of shared sovereignty, a pledge of her very soul to their united path. Shizuku smiled. By the ancient pact of the spirit and the mortal, by the will of the sea and the stillness, I declare you bound. Not as husband and wife as the small laws of men would define it, but as pillars of the coming age. One heart, one will, one path. As she finished, Naruto looked up at the sky and raised his hand. The sea around the island answered his call. A great, shimmering wave rose from the ocean, not to crash, but to arc over the island, creating a breathtaking, translucent canopy of swirling water and captured twilight. The last rays of the setting sun refracted through it, showering the pavilion and its guests in 1,000 shimmering, dancing rainbows. It was a blessing from the ocean itself. The celebration that followed was a tentative, hopeful affair. Music played, a fusion of soulful Land of Fire melodies and the percussive, powerful rhythms of Iwa. Laughter, hesitant at first, then more genuine, filled the air. Asuna Shinobi and an Aim Kunoichi discovered a shared appreciation for a particular vintage of sake. Kuretsuchi found herself in a surprisingly engaging debate with Mila Rose about the merits of different training regimens, their mutual respect for strength transcending the boundaries of their species. It was the picture of a new world, taking its first, awkward steps. Later, as the stars burned brightly in the clear, moonless sky, Naruto and Harribel slipped away. They stood on a private balcony carved into the cliff face, overlooking the endless, shimmering expanse of the sea. The dawn was still hours away, but the faintest hint of it was a promise on the eastern horizon. The ceremony was effective, Harribel said, her voice a low murmur in the quiet night. It has solidified your position. Even the Iowa delegation looks at you with a measure of respect, rather than pure hostility. It has solidified our position, Naruto corrected gently, his arm finding its way around her waist. She leaned into his warmth, a gesture of comfortable, easy intimacy. But this was the easy part. Declaring a new age is simpler than surviving it. The predators will still circle, she agreed. Her gaze on the dark water. Those who fear change will still plot in the shadows. Aizen's remnants are scattered, but not all are destroyed. And there are enemies in your world. Like that root operative, who will not accept this. Let them, Naruto said, his voice filled with a quiet, unshakable confidence. We didn't just have a party today. We showed them our shield. And we showed them it will hold. He fell silent, his senses expanding, as they always did when he was near the sea. He felt the currents, the sleeping life in the deepest trenches, the slow dance of the tides. And then, he felt something else. It was on the absolute, farthest edge of his perception. A flicker. Not of chakra, not of Ryutsu as he knew it. It was something colder, older, and impossibly distant. It was a feeling of perfect, clinical order, a spiritual pressure so vast and so remote it felt like a star observing an anthill. It was a fleeting sensation of being nautic, ed by a consciousness that operated on a cosmic, indifferent scale. The Soul King's palace. The Otsutsuki. He didn't know. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him despite the warmth of Harribel beside him, that their actions had finally made a ripple in a pond far, far larger than they had ever imagined. He didn't speak of it. It was a battle for another day. Today was for the dawn. He pulled her closer as the first faint hint of blue began to bleed into the eastern sky. She rested her head on his shoulder, two solitary, powerful figures who had found their equal. They were not the Kai Eldren of prophecy or the products of failed plans. They were not just a shinobi and an Arankar. The sun finally broke over the horizon, its brilliant, azure gold light flooding the world, chasing away the last of the night's shadows. They were the king and queen of this new era, forged by battle, bound by vows, and standing together to greet the azure dawn. Their age had just begun. Chapter 10 End.